Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back in time to explore what it was really like to live in a medieval castle. Picture it, gleaming towers against a blue sky, flags snapping in the wind, the distant sound of a knight's trumpet. It's the stuff of fantasy, the ultimate fortress of solitude and power. But let's be honest, if we dropped you there with your modern sensibilities, you probably wouldn't last a week. Statistically speaking, you'd be more likely to succumb to dysentery than to be swept off your feet by a knight in shining armour. The fairy tale version is just that, a story. The reality was a lot more fragrant. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for a bit of fun, post your city or country and the local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't the castle itself, but the road leading to it, or rather, the lack of one. What you're walking on is less a road and more a suggestion of a path, a wide, rutted track of churned mud that tries to steal your shoes with every step. For the last hour, the castle has been a distant silhouette on the horizon, slowly growing, resolving itself from a grey smudge into something immense, something impossible. Now, as you crest the final hill, it dominates your entire view, and it is, for a moment, breathtaking. Forget the clean, romanticised castles of storybooks. This is a brute, a hulking, monstrous beast of stone and timber, designed not for beauty but for pure, intimidating strength. The walls are thick, easily 12 feet across at their base, and they soar upwards, punctuated by narrow arrow slits that look like malevolent eyes staring down at you. You can see the different shades of stone, marking where repairs or additions were made over generations. It's a living thing, a testament to a century of paranoia and power. A flag bearing the Lord's sigil, a snarling boar perhaps, flutters from the tallest tower, a splash of colour against the grim, weathered grey. You feel an involuntary shiver of awe. This is real. This is power made manifest. But as you draw closer, another sensation begins to compete with the visual spectacle. It starts as a faint, unpleasant tang on the air, something vaguely organic and swampy. You might blame it on the marshy ground nearby, or perhaps a dead animal in the woods. But it grows stronger, more complex, and infinitely more foul with every step you take. This is no simple swamp gas. This is the castle's personal, bespoke perfume, and its primary ingredient comes from the moat. You imagined a moat as a clear, shimmering ribbon of water, maybe with a few graceful swans. The reality is a wide, stagnant ditch filled with murky, greenish-brown water. The surface is coated in a greasy film, broken up by floating clumps of, well, you'd rather not look too closely. This isn't just a defensive obstacle. It's the castle's primary sewage and garbage disposal system. Everything gets tossed in here. Human waste from the garderobes high above, animal dung from the stables, rotten food scraps from the kitchens, the occasional dead rat. The smell is an eye-watering blend of raw sewage, decay, and stagnant water, all gently cooking under the sun. It's like standing downwind of a landfill and a backed-up sewer pipe at the same time. The famous historical fact is that moats were a key defensive feature, and they were. But they were also profoundly disgusting open-air cesspools. A quirky tidbit of the era is that cleaning these pits was an actual specialised job. The men who did it were called gong-farmers, and they were tasked with dredging the filth from moats and cesspits, usually at night. It was a vile, hazardous job, but it was surprisingly well paid because, understandably, nobody else wanted it. So while the Lord lived in his stony fortress, it was the humble gong farmer who kept him from literally drowning in his own filth. You hold your breath as you finally reach the causeway leading to the main gate. The drawbridge is down, a heavy platform of thick wooden planks spanning the foul moat. Ahead of you is the gatehouse, a fortress in its own right, with a heavy iron-banded door and a menacing portcullis, a spiked iron grille hanging in the archway above, ready to slam down and impale anyone foolish enough to get caught underneath. Guards with suspicious eyes and rusty-looking polearms watch you approach. They are the medieval equivalent of overworked bouncers, and they look thoroughly unimpressed. As you wait for them to grant you entry, You glance past the gatehouse into the first courtyard, the outer bailey. It's a chaotic whirl of activity. Chickens scatter underfoot, a blacksmith's hammer rings out, and the air is thick with wood smoke and the shouting of men. This area is a bustling hub of trade and labour. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the outer bailey was purely for defence or more as a symbol of the lord's economic power, showcasing his livestock and workshops to all visitors. To you it just looks like loud, organised chaos. The smell is even stronger in here, a thick, cloying blanket of unwashed bodies, animal manure and smoke. The grandeur you saw from a distance is already dissolving, replaced by a gritty, smelly and intimidating reality. The gate guard finally gives you a curt nod. You take a deep, resigned breath and step across the threshold into the belly of the beast. You're ushered through the chaos of the outer bailey by a man who doesn't bother to give you his name. He moves with an economy of motion that tells you he's walked this path 1,000 times. He leads you past the bellowing blacksmith and a pen of squealing pigs, heading towards a towering stone structure that looks even more foreboding up close. The keep. This is the heart of the castle, its final defensive stronghold. You enter through a heavy studded oak door and are immediately plunged into relative darkness. The noise of the bailey fades, replaced by the echoing sounds of footsteps on stone and the low murmur of voices from unseen rooms. Your guide leads you up a spiral staircase. The design is clever and deadly. It corkscrews clockwise, which gives a right-handed swordsman defending from above the advantage, his sword arm free to swing, while an attacker coming up has his arm hampered by the central stone pillar. A classic feature of castle design, but for you it's just a cramped, dizzying climb. The stone steps are worn smooth and concave in the middle from centuries of use. There are no handrails. The only light comes from the occasional arrow slit, casting long, thin rectangles of dusty light onto the curving wall. It's claustrophobic and you have to fight the urge to run your hand along the damp, mossy stone for balance. Finally, he stops at a rough-planked door, lifts a simple iron latch, and shoves it open with a familiar groan. He gestures you inside with a flick of his head. "Here," he grunts, and that's the extent of your welcome ceremony. He turns and disappears back down the spiral stairs before you can even ask a question. You're left standing in the doorway of your new chamber, and it is, to put it mildly, a profound disappointment. Forget any notion of a cosy private room with a four-poster bed and a roaring fire. The space before you is a small rectangular cell, perhaps 15 by 20 feet. The walls are bare, rough-hewn stone, weeping with a thin sheen of moisture. There is one window, a narrow, unglazed slit high on the wall that offers a sliver of grey sky and a cutting draught, but no view. The floor is stone, uneven, and scattered with old, flattened rushes that crunch under your feet. But the most important feature is the bedding. Arranged around the perimeter of the room are about a dozen low mounds. These are your beds. One of them is now yours. You approach it and see that it's a simple sack made of coarse, scratchy linen, loosely stuffed with what you realise is straw. This is a pallet, or more accurately a paillasse. You press down on it. The straw is dry and brittle, compacted from use, and it rustles with a sound that seems far too loud in the quiet room. You can already feel the lumps and the prickly ends of straw poking through the fabric. It's less like a mattress and more like a bag of lawn clippings you forgot to put out for collection. You are not alone. Several other people are already in the room, silently claiming their own pallets. A couple of weary-looking men-at-arms are methodically checking their gear. A serving girl sits with her back against the wall, mending a tunic. No one looks at you with anything more than a brief assessing glance. There's no camaraderie here, just a quiet understanding of shared misery. Think of it as the world's most depressing youth hostel, where the only thing on the activities board is try not to get stabbed. The concept of personal space has yet to be invented. The mainstream historical fact is that for anyone other than the Lord and his immediate family, communal living was the absolute norm. Servants, soldiers, stable hands, and guests of low rank were all housed together in dormitory-style rooms like this one. A quirky tidbit is the hierarchy even within this squalor. While you get a basic straw-stuffed sack on the floor, you might notice one person in the room has a slightly more sophisticated setup, a truckle bed. This was a low, wheeled bed frame that could be rolled underneath a larger, more important bed during the day. The master of a room got the main bed, his personal attendant, or squire slept on the truckle bed. It was a literal representation of their social standing. even while they slept. Here, in a room with no master bed, having a truckle bed would mark you as the senior occupant, the big cheese of this particular stone box. You claim the last available pallet, shoving it a few inches away from your silent neighbour. In the corner of the room, you spot the chamber pot. It is a simple ceramic bucket, and you decide then and there that you will hold it in for as long as humanly possible. This shared room is your bedroom, your lounge, and unfortunately your bathroom. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval people even conceptualised privacy as a desirable state. For them, being alone might have been seen as strange or lonely. Safety was in numbers, even if those numbers came with a symphony of snoring, coughing, and other bodily noises you'd rather not think about. For you, raised on the idea of a private bedroom as a sanctuary, this is a special kind of nightmare. You sit down on your crackling pallet, the damp stone wall cold against your back, and begin to understand that in a medieval castle, you are never, ever truly alone. You don't even have to wait for nightfall to feel it. The cold starts as a subtle coolness on your skin, a faint whisper against the back of your neck from that unglazed window slit. But it doesn't take long for it to sink deeper. It's a persistent, invasive chill that seems to emanate from the very bones of the castle itself. You pull your cloak tighter around you, but it's like trying to stop the tide with a teacup. The cold isn't just in the air, it's radiating from every single surface. This is the great, uncomfortable secret of stone castles. They are magnificent heat sinks. The massive, thick stone walls that are so effective at stopping a catapult stone are also incredibly efficient at absorbing and holding on to the cold. In the summer, this might offer a brief clammy respite from the midday sun. But for the other 9 months of the year, it turns the entire castle into a giant man-made refrigerator. The stone soaks up the chill from the night air and the damp ground, and then it radiates it back into every room, every hallway, day and night. You run a hand along the wall of your chamber and the stone is shockingly cold, slick with a film of condensation. It feels like touching a slab in a butcher's shop. The floor is no better. Even through the soles of your shoes you can feel the cold seeping upwards, a slow, creeping numbness that works its way into your feet and ankles. You quickly learn to keep your feet up, to tuck them under you when you sit on your straw pallet. Leaving them on the floor is a rookie mistake. Of course, they had fire, but fire in a castle is a complicated and often inadequate solution. Your small shared chamber has no fireplace. That's a luxury reserved for the most important rooms, the Great Hall, the Lord's Solar, maybe the kitchen. So for you, there is no crackling hearth to gather around. Your only sources of warmth are your own body heat, the body heat of the dozen other people crammed into the room with you, and whatever blankets you can acquire. The common blanket is a rough, heavy wool, stiff and scratchy against your skin. It smells faintly of damp dog and wood smoke, and you suspect it hasn't been properly washed ever. Even in the places that do have fireplaces, the relief is localised and fleeting. You make your way down to the Great Hall later, drawn by the promise of a fire, and there it is, a colossal hearth, big enough for a person to stand in, with a huge log fire roaring away. But as you approach, you discover a strange phenomenon. The heat is intense, almost scorching, if you stand directly in front of it. Your face and the front of your body feel like they're cooking, but your back, still exposed to the cavernous, draughty hall, remains stubbornly, achingly cold. The fire creates a small bubble of warmth in a vast ocean of chill. This is why the high-backed settles, those long wooden benches with high backs and sides, were invented. They weren't just for looks. They were a practical defence against the relentless draughts that swirled through these large rooms. By sitting on a settle, you could trap some of the fire's heat and shield your back from the icy crosswinds. A historical fact that underlines this struggle for warmth is the immense amount of fuel a castle consumed. A moderately sized castle might burn through hundreds of tons of firewood in a single winter, requiring a small army of woodcutters working year-round just to keep the fires fed. A quirky detail about staying warm involved your wardrobe. You don't just wear more layers, you wear them to bed. Everyone, from the lowest servant to the lord himself, wore bedclothes, often including caps or coifs to keep their heads warm. The iconic image of someone in a nightshirt and a long floppy cap isn't just a cartoon cliché, it was a practical necessity to prevent body heat from escaping through your head while you slept in a freezing room. You might even find people sleeping with their day clothes on under their blankets for extra insulation. Forget silk pyjamas. Your best bet is a woolen tunic that already smells like you. Historians still argue about the true comfort levels of the medieval elite. Some suggest that they were simply more acclimatized to the cold, their bodies toughened by a lifetime of exposure. Others argue that they were in a state of perpetual discomfort, and that their obsession with rich foods, furs and spices was a desperate attempt to create a sense of internal warmth and luxury to counteract the harshness of their environment. Looking at the lord's family huddled near the fire, wrapped in fur-lined robes while servants shiver just a few feet away, you tend to believe the latter. As night falls, the cold in your chamber becomes actively hostile. The draught from the window slit now feels like a physical presence, a stream of icy air directed right at your palate. You curl up under your single wool blanket, tucking it tightly around you. You can hear the chattering of your own teeth. You try to arrange your straw pallet to provide a bit more insulation from the stone floor, but it's a losing battle. The cold is relentless. It gnaws at your joints and settles deep in your bones. You fall into a fitful, shivering sleep, dreaming not of dragons or knights, but of central heating and a decent duvet. This is your life now. A constant low-grade battle against a damp, penetrating and inescapable cold. You're drawn from your cold, shared chamber by the sounds of rising commotion and the distant, enticing smell of roasting meat, a welcome change from the usual scent of damp stone and mildew. Following the flow of people, you find yourself at the entrance to the Great Hall, the social and political epicentre of the entire castle, and for a moment, standing in the arched doorway, it looks just like the stories. The room is immense, a cavern of stone with a high, vaulted ceiling supported by massive timber beams, darkened by centuries of smoke. The roaring fire in the hearth we just discussed casts flickering, dancing shadows that make the room feel alive. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, streams through the tall arched windows high on one wall. These ones actually have glass, a sign of immense wealth. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform called a dais, sits the high table. This is where the lord, his family and any honoured guests will dine, physically elevated above everyone else. Long, rough-hewn trestle tables are arranged perpendicular to it, filling the main floor of the hall. It's an impressive, imposing space designed to project power and authority. But then you step inside, and the romantic image shatters into 1,000 grubby pieces. The first thing that hits you is the sheer volume. The acoustics of the stone hall amplify every sound into a deafening roar. People are shouting, laughing, arguing. A minstrel in a corner is trying to play a lute, but his delicate music is mostly lost in the din. And then there are the dogs. Dozens of them. They are everywhere. Lanky, hungry-looking hounds weaving between the tables, barking, growling and snapping at each other over fallen scraps. They are the castle's living garbage disposal unit, and they contribute significantly to the noise and the smell. The floor, you realise, is disgusting. What you thought was just dark stone is actually stone covered in a thick layer of filth. It's scattered with rushes, just like your chamber, but these are old, trampled and soaked with spilled ale, grease, gnawed bones and whatever the dogs have left behind. Every few days, a fresh layer of rushes is thrown on top of the old one, creating a kind of medieval compost lasagna of filth that can build up for months. You try to watch where you step, but it's a hopeless cause. You find a space on one of the lower benches. There are no placemats, no cutlery to speak of, maybe just a knife if you brought your own, and a wooden or pewter cup. Your plate is a thick, hollowed-out slab of stale bread called a trencher. This is a famous historical fact of medieval dining. You eat your meal off a piece of bread, and when you're done, if you're a well-behaved guest, you might give the gravy-soaked trencher to the poor who wait by the door. More likely, you just toss it to the dogs. A serving boy sloops a ladle of pottage onto your trencher, splashing some on the table. The man next to you belches loudly, wipes his greasy hands on his tunic, and then tears into a hunk of bread with his teeth. Across from you, 2 men-at-arms are having a heated argument that seems to be escalating toward a physical confrontation. This isn't a dignified courtly dinner. It's a rowdy, chaotic and profoundly unhygienic free-for-all. It feels less like a king's court and more like a poorly supervised school cafeteria during a food fight. A quirky and rather unpleasant tidbit of hall life involves the reredos. In some earlier castles, the central hearth was just that, a fire pit in the middle of the floor. There was no chimney. The smoke would simply rise and, in theory, exit through a hole in the roof called a louver. In reality, the hall was perpetually filled with a thick, choking cloud of smoke that stung your eyes, made you cough, and coated every surface and every lung with a layer of greasy soot. Even in this more advanced hall with its wall hearth and chimney, the draught is poor, and a hazy, acrid smog still hangs in the upper reaches of the room, occasionally swirling down to make you wheeze. Historians still argue about the true nature of chivalry and courtly manners in this setting. Was the boorish, loud behaviour you're witnessing the norm, or was it punctuated by moments of genuine, refined courtliness, as described in the epic poems? The poems speak of knights who are gentle, well-spoken, and respectful to ladies. The reality you're seeing involves a lot more shouting, spitting, and throwing bones on the floor. Perhaps the poetry was more aspirational than descriptive, a set of ideals to strive for precisely because the day-to-day reality was so rough. The lord and his family finally make their entrance and take their seats at the high table. A hush falls over the hall for a moment, a brief nod to the hierarchy before the noise level creeps back up. They are served finer food, on pewter or even silver plates. They have servants who bring them wine. They are separate, removed, observing the chaos from their perch. For them, the great hall is a stage upon which to display their status. For you, down on the crowded benches, it's a noisy, smelly, and uncomfortable ordeal. You eat your pottage quickly, trying to ignore the dog sniffing at your leg and the argument brewing next to you. The great hall might be the heart of the castle, but it's a heart that's loud, smoky, and clogged with grime. At some point during the chaotic meal in the great hall, nature makes its inevitable call. You discreetly ask the person next to you where one might find the privy, and he jerks a thumb towards a small, inconspicuous door at the far end of the hall, partly hidden behind a heavy tapestry. With a sense of trepidation, you excuse yourself from the bench, carefully navigate the dogs and the discarded bones, and make your way to the door. You pull the heavy tapestry aside, revealing a short, narrow passage cut into the thickness of the castle's outer wall. The air in this passage is immediately colder, and carries a distinctly foul, ammoniac smell that makes the general stench of the hall seem pleasant by comparison. You follow the corridor for about 15 feet, and it ends in a small, cramped chamber, barely big enough for one person. This is the garderobe. The name garderobe is a French euphemism, literally meaning wardrobe. A popular theory, now a well-known historical fact, is that people would hang their clothes in these shafts, because the ammonia fumes from the urine below would kill fleas and other pests. So, in a way, it was a combination toilet and pest control closet. A convenient, if pungent, 2-for-1 deal. You, however, are not here to store your cloak. The toilet itself is a simple stone or wooden bench with a hole carved in it. It's positioned directly over a vertical shaft that drops straight down the outside of the castle wall. There is no door for privacy, no water for flushing, and certainly no toilet paper. Your options for hygiene are a handful of moss, hay, or perhaps a scrap of old cloth if you're lucky. You peek down the hole. It's a long, dark drop to the moat or a dedicated cesspit at the base of the tower. A chilling, foul-smelling draught blows up from the darkness below, a phenomenon known as blowback, which is especially bracing on a cold day. It's a direct, unfiltered olfactory connection to the accumulated waste of the entire castle population. You sit down on the cold, hard seat, your feet dangling uncomfortably if you're not tall enough. The position is precarious. You're essentially perched inside a chimney of filth, suspended several stories above the ground. The thought of slipping or the bench breaking is a fleeting but very real terror. Castles were, after all, built by medieval engineering, which wasn't always a guarantee of perfect stability. There are historical accounts, though rare, of castle floors collapsing, and you can't help but imagine the ignominy of your end being a long drop into the cesspit. A quirky and frankly terrifying tidbit about the garderobe is its vulnerability during a siege. Attackers were well aware of these toilet chutes. They were a weak point in the castle's defences. There are documented cases of besieging soldiers attempting to climb up the slippery, filth-encrusted shafts to gain surprise entry into the castle. It's an act of incredible bravery and desperation. More commonly, an enemy archer with a good eye and a cruel sense of humour might station himself where he had a clear shot at the exit of the garderobe chute, waiting for a tragically unlucky soul to use the facilities. It gives a whole new meaning to the term pot shot. Historians still debate the true origin of the name garderobe. While the clothes storing theory is the most popular, Some linguists argue it could simply be a corruption of garderobe, to guard the robe, perhaps referring to the small chamber as a place to store robes, with the toilet function being a secondary, convenient addition. Or it could be a simple euphemism like calling a toilet the powder room, an attempt to put a polite name on a very impolite reality. Whatever the origin, the name is far more elegant than the experience. You finish your business as quickly as humanly possible, trying to breathe shallowly through your mouth. The thought of the long, dark drop and the stinking updraft is unsettling. This single, shared facility serves dozens, if not hundreds of people. The lack of sanitation is staggering. The shaft is an open invitation for flies in the summer and a direct conduit for disease. You stand up, your mission accomplished, and glance around the tiny stone room. You see centuries of grime on the walls, and the air is so thick you can almost taste it. You hurry back down the short passage, pull the tapestry back, and re-enter the great hall. The noise, the smoke, and the smell of dogs and spilled ale suddenly seem far less offensive. You have a newfound appreciation for the fresh air of the main hall. You return to your seat at the trestle table, and the man next to you gives you a knowing look. No words are exchanged. None are needed. You have both shared in one of the most fundamental and universally unpleasant experiences of castle life. You take a large swig of your ale, trying to wash the taste of the Garderobes' foul air from the back of your throat. The first light of dawn is not a gentle golden glow. It's a weak, grey smear in the unglazed window slit of your chamber, doing little to dispel the gloom. You're not woken by an alarm clock, but by a far more insistent and ancient signal, the tolling of a bell from the castle's chapel. This is the first of the canonical hours, matins or lauds, ringing out long before the sun is properly up. For the monks and the chaplain, it's a call to prayer. For you and everyone else in the castle, it's the factory whistle. The workday has begun. There's no easing into the morning, no coffee, no quiet moment to yourself. You're swept up in a tide of groaning, stretching and complaining bodies as your dozen roommates rouse themselves from their lumpy straw pallets. The air is thick with the sour smell of sleep and unwashed humanity. You pull on your clothes, the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before, and stumble out of the chamber, your stomach rumbling with a dull ache. Your role in this castle dictates your entire day. You're not a free agent with choices and hobbies. You're a cog in a large, complex machine, and your purpose is to perform your designated function from sunup to sundown. If you're a man-at-arms, your day is a grueling cycle of guard duty, weapons practice, and maintaining your gear. If you're a stable hand, your day is an endless procession of mucking out stalls, hauling water, and tending to the Lord's precious horses. If you are a woman, your tasks are likely domestic, spinning wool, weaving cloth, baking bread in the smoky bakehouse, tending the fires, or endless back-breaking laundry. Let's imagine you've been assigned to the kitchens, a promotion from some even less desirable task. Your day starts not with cooking, but with hauling. You join a line of other servants, each grabbing 2 heavy wooden buckets. Your first task is to fetch water from the well in the centre of the bailey. The well is the lifeblood of the castle, its most critical resource after food. You lower a bucket on a long rough rope, the winch groaning in protest. Then you haul it back up hand over hand, your muscles already burning. The water sloshes over the sides, soaking your shoes and the front of your tunic. The cold is immediate and sharp. You make this trip not once, not twice, but dozens of times until the massive cisterns in the kitchen are full. Then it's on to the next task. The head cook, a tyrannical figure with a greasy apron and a short temper, barks an order. You need to pluck 3 dozen chickens for the evening meal. You sit on a low stool in a cold, draughty corner, a pile of dead birds next to you. The work is tedious and messy. Feathers get everywhere, in your hair, on your clothes, up your nose. Your fingers grow numb and stiff as you systematically strip each bird bare. The smell of raw poultry and blood is nauseating. This is the relentless rhythm of your life. There is no weekend. There is no concept of a 9-to-5 workday. Your labour is governed by the sun and the needs of the household. A well-known historical fact is that time itself was measured differently. For most people, the day was divided not by hours and minutes, but by the church bells ringing for the canonical hours, prime, terce, sext, nons, vespers, and compline. These bells mark the only formal divisions in a long, unbroken stretch of toil. A quirky tidbit that highlights the sheer drudgery is the concept of Saint Monday. While not officially sanctioned in some trades, it was a folk tradition where workers would informally decide not to work on a Monday, claiming it as an extension of their Sunday rest. It was a small act of rebellion against the endless grind, though it would likely earn you a beating or dismissal in a tightly controlled environment like a castle. Here, St. Monday is a fantasy. After the chickens comes the chopping. Piles of onions, carrots and turnips need to be reduced to a manageable size for the great cooking pot. You use a heavy knife with a dull blade, and you have to be careful not to take a piece of your finger off with the vegetables. All around you, the kitchen is a hive of frantic activity. Bread is being kneaded, fires are being stoked, meat is being turned on a spit by a small boy whose sole job is to keep it from burning. The heat is intense, the air thick with smoke and 100 different smells. Historians still debate the level of agency that lower-class individuals had within this rigid system. Were they completely trapped, with no hope of changing their station, or were there subtle ways to improve one's lot? Could a clever kitchen hand catch the eye of the steward and be promoted to a less physically demanding role? It was certainly possible, but overwhelmingly your birth determined your life's path. If you were born the son of a blacksmith, you would likely be a blacksmith. If you were born a servant, you would likely die a servant. Social mobility was the exception, not the rule. By the time the sun begins to set, your body aches in places you didn't know existed. Your back is a knot of pain from hauling water and bending over a chopping block. Your hands are raw and blistered. You are bone-tired, but the day isn't over. After the evening meal is served and cleared, there are still floors to be swept, or at least have fresh rushes scattered over them, pots to be scrubbed with sand and elbow grease, and preparations to be made for the next day. It's only when the final bell for Compline rings that you are released. You trudge back to your cold chamber, collapse onto your straw pallet without even bothering to remove your filthy clothes, and fall into a heavy, dreamless sleep. You have 6 hours, maybe 7, before the bell tolls again, and the relentless grind begins once more. Your stomach has been a hollow, aching pit since you woke, and the meagre breakfast of coarse bread and weak, watery ale did little to change that. Throughout the long day of relentless labour, the thought of dinner is a distant, shimmering hope. You imagine a hearty meal, perhaps a piece of that chicken you spent all afternoon plucking, or a thick slice of roasted meat. But as you finally take your place at the trestle table in the great hall, a familiar, disheartening smell wafts from the steaming cauldrons. It's the smell of boiled vegetables and simmering grain. It's the smell of pottage. A serving boy comes down the line, sloshing a ladleful of thick, brownish-green stew onto your trencher, the stale bread plate that is already starting to get soggy. You stare down at your dinner. It's a homogeneous, unappetizing slurry. You can identify some lumps of turnip, the occasional sliver of carrot, and maybe a few stray leaves of cabbage. The bulk of it is barley or oats, boiled down to a thick, glutinous paste. This is pottage, the staple food for virtually everyone in the castle who isn't seated at the high table. It is the fuel that keeps the machine running, and it is profoundly, soul-crushingly boring. You take your first spoonful, it's hot, which is something, but it's also bland. The primary seasoning is salt, and even that is used sparingly. Spices like pepper, cloves, or cinnamon are fantastically expensive, worth more than their weight in gold, and are reserved exclusively for the Lord's table as a display of wealth. Your pottage is flavoured with whatever cheap herbs could be grown in the castle garden. Parsley, perhaps, or a bit of sage. The vegetables are boiled to a soft, uniform mouche, their individual flavours lost in the general starchy blandness of the grain. This is your dinner tonight. It was also your dinner last night, and the night before that, and it will be your dinner tomorrow. A well-known historical fact is that the diet of a medieval peasant or servant was incredibly monotonous. While the wealthy feasted on a huge variety of meats and imported luxuries, the lower classes subsisted on a diet primarily composed of bread, cheese, and pottage. Meat was a raw treat, perhaps appearing in the stew in the form of a few gristly bits of bacon or a boiled knucklebone for flavour, but a proper serving of meat was reserved for feast days or special occasions. You chew slowly, the rough texture of the barley scraping against the roof of your mouth. Every meal is a variation on the same theme. Sometimes the pottage might be a white pottage, made with milk or almond milk, a a surprisingly common medieval ingredient, especially for Lenten days when dairy was forbidden, Or it might be a green pottage, heavy with leeks and herbs in the spring. But the fundamental character of the dish remains the same, a bland, filling, boiled mush. It's designed for sustenance, not pleasure. A quirky culinary tidbit from the era is the existence of mock foods, which were particularly popular for the Lenten season when meat was forbidden. Cooks would get creative, making eggs out of hollowed-out eggshells filled with almond milk pudding, or crafting fish out of ground almonds and rice moulded into the shape of a pike. This ingenuity, however, was generally for the benefit of the upper classes, who couldn't bear to go without the appearance of their favourite foods. Down on your bench you get no such artistry. Your Lenten pottage is just the regular pottage, minus the bacon bits. You look up at the high table on the dais. The lord and his family are eating a completely different meal. They have roasted peacock, its feathers reattached for a dramatic presentation. They have delicate fish pies, sauces thickened with expensive spices, and bright yellow custards coloured with saffron. The contrast is stark and absolute. It is a visual and olfactory representation of the social gulf that separates you from them. They eat for pleasure, for status, and for entertainment. You eat to survive until the next bell tolls. Historians still debate the nutritional adequacy of the common medieval diet. Was a diet so heavily reliant on grains and root vegetables actually healthy? On one hand, it was low in fat and high in fibre. Some analyses suggest that, when supplemented with cheese and ale, it provided enough calories to fuel a day of hard labour. On the other hand, it was likely deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, leading to chronic health problems. Scurvy was not just a sailor's disease. It could affect an inland castle population during long winters when fresh greens were unavailable. The monotony itself was a form of psychological wear, a daily reminder of your lowly place in the world. You finish your pottage using the last corner of your soggy trencher to scrape the bowl clean. You're no longer hungry, but you're not satisfied either. The meal was a heavy, stolid presence in your stomach, a biological necessity that has been met. There is no joy in it, no sense of culinary pleasure, it's just fuel. You toss the trencher to one of the waiting dogs, who gulps it down in one go. You wash the bland taste away with a swig of the thin, sour ale from your cup. As you get up from the bench, you already know, with a deep, weary certainty, what you'll be having for dinner tomorrow. More pottage. Just when you think you might waste away from the sheer monotony of the pottage diet, a wave of excitement ripples through the castle. A messenger has arrived. The lord's cousin, a minor knight with a small retinue, is coming to visit. This means a feast will be held. For days the castle is thrown into a frenzy of preparation that makes the normal daily grind look like a holiday. The energy is palpable, a mix of stress for the senior staff and anticipation for everyone else. For you, it means even harder work, but it also carries a tantalising promise, a chance to eat something other than boiled mush. Historians still debate the true purpose of the most elaborate subtleties. Were these intricate food sculptures, like a castle made of pastry or a ship made of marzipan, actually meant to be eaten? Some sources suggest they were purely decorative, paraded around the hall and then set aside. Others claim they were indeed consumed by the high-ranking guests, at least in part. It's likely a mix of both. The main purpose was the wow factor, a demonstration of the Lord's power and the skill of his kitchen staff. Whether anyone actually ate the cold, feather-covered peacock was secondary to the impression it made. As the feast wears on, more and more dishes are brought out, a seemingly endless parade of pies, tarts, jellies and fritters. You eat until you're stuffed, a feeling so foreign and luxurious that it's almost uncomfortable. The ale flows freely, much stronger and better tasting than the usual watery swill. The hall grows louder, the laughter more raucous. The social rules loosen. The men-at-arms are telling bawdy jokes, and even the lord at the high table can be seen laughing, his face flushed with wine. For a few hours the rigid hierarchy of the castle seems to soften. The feast is a shared experience, a communal indulgence that temporarily bridges the gap between the high and low tables. But it's an illusion. As the night ends and you stumble back to your cold chamber, your belly full for the first time, you know that tomorrow it's back to the grind. Back to the bland reality of pottage. The feast was not a change in your status. It was a carefully managed spectacle, a temporary pressure release valve. It was more about showing off than about good food. A delicious, spicy and ultimately deceptive performance. Waking up after the feast is a grim affair. Your head throbs from the unaccustomed strength of the good ale, and your stomach feels heavy and unsettled. The first order of business, as with every morning, is to quench your thirst. You instinctively head for the water bucket in your chamber, but then you remember the warnings you received on your first day. You remember the taste of that water and think better of it. In your modern mind, water is the purest, most basic form of hydration. In the medieval castle, water is a gamble with your life. The primary water source, the well in the bailey, is a feat of engineering, often dug incredibly deep to reach the water table, but its location within the castle walls makes it dangerously susceptible to contamination. Remember the moat, that open sewer surrounding the castle, and the cesspits at the base of the Garderobe towers? All that filth seeps into the ground. While the well is deep, it's not immune. Runoff from the stables, the pigsty, and the general grime of the bailey can also find its way in. A single outbreak of a waterborne illness like dysentery or cholera could sweep through the castle population, killing more people than a small army. Drinking the water straight is a high-stakes game of medieval roulette. The night of the feast arrives. The great hall has been transformed. Fresh, sweet-smelling rushes cover the filthy floor. Brightly coloured tapestries, usually kept in storage, have been hung on the stone walls, their woven scenes of hunts and battles, adding a splash of life and helping to insulate the room. The trestle tables are laid with linen cloths, not spotlessly clean, perhaps, but a definite step up. The high table on the dais is even more magnificent, gleaming with the Lord's best silver cups and platters. You take your usual spot on a lower bench, but the atmosphere is completely different. The air is electric with anticipation. The noise is louder, more joyous. The minstrel in the corner has been joined by a man with a drum and another with a flute, and their combined music is lively and bold, managing to rise above the din. Then the food begins to arrive, and it is a spectacle. This is not about simple sustenance. It's about theatre. A procession of servants emerges from the kitchens carrying massive platters. A whole roasted pig, an apple stuffed in its mouth, is presented to the high table with great ceremony. It's followed by swans and peacocks, roasted and then painstakingly redressed in their own feathers to look as if they were still alive. A popular and dramatic dish known as a sottlety, or subtlety. These aren't just food. They're conversation pieces, edible sculptures designed to elicit gasps of wonder from the guests. Down at your table, things are less dramatic, but still a massive improvement. Platters of roasted meats are brought out. Beef, mutton, and yes, even the chickens you plucked. For the first time, you're served a thick slice of meat on your trencher. You tear into it with an almost primal hunger. It's rich, it's savoury, and it's interesting. The flavour is intense, almost overpowering. It's been heavily seasoned, not with simple salt, but with a powerful blend of spices. You can taste pepper, a hint of ginger, maybe something exotic and musky you can't quite name. And this is the deceptive secret of the grand medieval feast. It wasn't always a celebration of fresh, high-quality ingredients. A well-known historical fact is that heavy spicing was used as much to show off the Lord's wealth as it was to disguise the taste of meat that was less than fresh. Without refrigeration, keeping large quantities of meat from spoiling was a constant challenge. Salting, smoking, and pickling were the primary methods of preservation, but these techniques couldn't always stop the slow march of decay. A strong dose of expensive spices could mask the flavour of meat that was beginning to turn, making it palatable for consumption. So while you're enjoying the most flavourful food you've had in ages, you're probably also eating meat that's a few days past its prime. A quirky and slightly deceptive tidbit of feast presentation was the use of colour. Medieval chefs were masters of food colouring, using natural ingredients to make their dishes as vibrant as possible. Saffron created a brilliant yellow, sandalwood a rich red, and parsley or spinach a deep green. A dish called blank manger, a kind of chicken and rice pudding, was supposed to be as white as possible, a sign of its purity and expensive ingredients. Sometimes, however, these colours could also be used to hide imperfections in the food. A greyish piece of fish could be made to look more appealing with a splash of yellow colouring. So what do you drink? The answer is on the trestle table at every meal, from the moment you wake until you go to sleep. You drink alcohol. Specifically, you drink ale or wine. This isn't a sign of rampant alcoholism across the land. It's a matter of public health. The process of brewing ale and fermenting wine involves boiling the water and then introducing yeast. which kills most of the harmful bacteria. This makes alcoholic beverages significantly safer to drink than water. This is a bedrock historical fact of the period. For most people, beer and wine were the primary sources of daily hydration. The ale served to you and the other lower-ranking inhabitants is what's known as small beer. It's made from the second or even third rinsing of the barley mash used to make the Lord's strong, flavourful ale. As a result, it's low in alcohol content, probably around 1 to 2% ABV, similar to a modern kombucha, and has a thin, slightly sour taste. It's not about getting intoxicated, it's about having a safe, calorie-rich liquid to drink throughout the day. You'll see everyone, including children, drinking it. A serving boy might be given a cup of small beer with his breakfast crust, as it's safer than the water and provides some much-needed calories for a day of work. You take a long drink from your wooden cup of this morning's ale. It's cool and slightly vinegary, but it quenches your thirst without filling you with a sense of impending doom. It is, essentially, liquid bread, and forms a cornerstone of your daily caloric intake. A quirky tidbit about medieval drinks involves a beverage called posset. This was a popular bedtime drink, especially for those feeling unwell. It was made by curdling hot milk with wine or ale, and then seasoning it with sugar and spices if you were wealthy. The result was a warm, two-layered drink with a creamy curd on top and a spiced whey-like liquid below. It was considered both a comforting treat and a form of medicine, prescribed for everything from colds to insomnia. For you, a posset would be an unimaginable luxury. Your bedtime drink is the last dregs of the day's small beer. At the high table, the beverage situation is, of course, entirely different. The lord and his family drink strong, rich, dark ales and, more importantly, wine. Wine was not commonly produced in England in large quantities, so most of it was imported from France, particularly the region of Gascony. A cellar full of French wine was the ultimate status symbol. It demonstrated wealth, international connections, and sophisticated taste. Historians still debate the average daily consumption of these beverages. Some textual sources suggest staggering quantities, with some monastic orders allotting over a gallon of ale per monk per day. Was this figure literal, or did it also account for ale used in cooking or given to guests and servants? It's hard to say for certain, but it's clear that consumption was high. In a world where your main food is blé, your life in the castle is lived in a state of constant low-level hydration provided by this thin, ubiquitous ale. You drink it when you wake, you drink it with your meals, and you drink it during breaks from your work. Water is treated with suspicion, something you use for washing or boiling, but not for drinking raw. You learn to appreciate the sour tang of the small beer, not for its taste, but for what it represents. Safety. It won't give you the bloody flux that laid low 2 of the kitchen hands last month. It won't give you the stomach cramps that seem to plague newcomers. It's a humble, reliable, and essential part of your survival in this stone fortress, a constant companion from the pre-dawn bell to the final moments before you collapse onto your straw pallet. Curiosity, or perhaps a direct order from the perpetually angry head cook, leads you into the very heart of the castle's food production, the kitchens. If the Great Hall is the castle stage, the kitchen is its frantic, filthy, and dangerously hot backstage area. You push open a heavy wooden door and are hit by a wall of heat, smoke, and noise that makes the Great Hall seem serene by comparison. The room is a cavern of soot-stained stone. It's dominated by at least 1, possibly 2, colossal fireplaces, each large enough to roast an entire ox. One of these is roaring with a fire so intense it creates its own shimmering haze, the heat radiating out in waves that you can feel from across the room. Turning on a spit in front of this inferno is a row of geese, dripping fat that sizzles and spits as it hits the coals below. The person turning the spit is a small Section 10 curiosity, or perhaps just a desire to escape your assigned task of scrubbing, sweat-soaked boy, known as a spit-jack or turn-spit, whose entire existence is dedicated pots for an hour, leads you to the heart of the castle's food production, the kitchens, if the Great Hall is thee to this monotonous, scorching task. He sits as far from the heat as he can, endlessly rotating the handle, his face, castle's social heart. The kitchen is its roaring, chaotic stomach. Located in a separate building or a heavily fortified section of the mask of weary resignation. The air is thick with a greasy, choking smoke. Despite the massive chimneys, the ventilation main keep to minimise the risk of a catastrophic fire, the kitchen is a place you smell and hear long before you see it. It's terrible, and a perpetual smog hangs in the air, burning your eyes and catching in the back of your throat. You can see the ceiling beams are coated in a thick black sticky layer of creosote, a flammable residue that has built as you approach. The heat becomes a physical force, blasting out from the open doorway. The air is thick with a cocktail of smells: roasting meat, simmering pottage, wood smoke, spilled ale, and the underlying scent of old up over decades. The whole room feels like a tinderbox, one stray spark away from a major inferno. You watch as a cook butchers a side of beef on a massive wooden block, the meat attracting a cloud of flies. When he's done, he simply shoves the scraps onto the floor, where they're instantly descended upon by the ever. However, old recipes sometimes call for verjuice of crabs, which historians have discovered refers not to crustaceans but to the present kitchen dogs. These animals, along with the cats that prowl the rafters, are the kitchen's only pest use of crab apples. A simple misunderstanding that could lead to a very different tasting sauce. But in a kitchen this control team, you see a rat scurry along a high shelf and no one even bats an eye. Vermin are just chaotic. You wouldn't be surprised to find a few actual crabs, or at least a few spiders or flies, another ingredient in the daily stew of kitchen life. A quirky and rather ingenious tidbit of medieval kitchen technology is the H, ending up in the pottage pot. You see a cook kneading a huge mound of dough on a flour-dusted table. He's sweating from the heat, and a drop of sweat falls from his brow directly into Stina, a device that looks like a tall curved metal screen. It was placed behind the meat roasting on a spit, its polished surface reflecting the fire's heat back onto the meat. This helped the joint to cook more evenly and the dough. He doesn't notice, or doesn't care, and continues to knead it in, nearby quickly hastening the process. It was a simple but effective piece of engineering in a room that otherwise another assistant is gutting fish, tossing the entrails into a wooden bucket on the floor that's already buzzing with flies, relied on brute force and open flames. The division of labour is strict and hierarchical. Under the head cook, a specialised smell is a complex and challenging blend of roasting meat, boiling cabbage, baking bread, old grease, and raw sewage from cooks for roasting, baking and pastry. Below them are the legions of servants, scullions and boys like a poorly drained floor channel. Historians still debate how medieval people perceived this level of filth. Was there you, performing the endless grunt work, chopping, peeling, pounding spices in a mortar, and most importantly hauling concept of cleanliness simply so different from ours that they were untroubled by it? Or were they aware? Everything has to be moved by hand. Sacks of flour, barrels of ale, carcasses of animals, and endless of the squalor but powerless to change it in a world without modern sanitation, disinfectants, and an understanding of germ buckets of water and firewood. The kitchen runs on human muscle. You see a team of bakers near a set of massive dom theory. The evidence suggests a bit of both. There are medieval texts that offer advice on keeping kitchens clean, so the idealed brick ovens. They are covered in flour from head to toe, kneading huge masses of dough in long wooden troughs. They existed. However, the practical reality, especially in a large, busy institutional kitchen like this one, was almost certainly one of controlled bread they produce is the foundation of the entire castle's diet, from the fine, white manchet bread for the lord's chaos and pervasive grime. The floor is a treacherous landscape of spilled grease, water, animal blood, and vegetable scraps. There's no orderly system, grease and unwashed bodies. You step inside and are immediately swallowed by a vision of organised pandemonium. The room is vast and cavernous, with a ceiling so high it's lost in a permanent haze of smoke and steam. The main features of waste disposal, unwanted bits, are simply tossed onto the floor to be trodden underfoot or scavenged by the bold of the fireplaces. There isn't just one. There are several, each the size of a small room, in est of the kitchen cats. The general chaos is orchestrated by the head cook, who stands in the centre of the room like one. An entire ox is slowly turning on a massive hand-cranked spit. The job of turning the furious conductor, shouting orders, brandishing a ladle like a weapon, and occasionally clipping a lazy kitchen hand on the ear. Spit is delegated to a lowly spitjack or turnspit, often a young boy who has. This is where your pottage and the Lord's roasted peacock both begin their journey. The sheer scale of to sit by the scorching fire for hours, enduring the blistering heat, It's a miserable, monotonous job. In another operation is impressive. A massive copper cauldron, big enough to bathe in, sits over a slower fire, bubbling with the day hearth. Huge black cauldrons, big enough to bathe in, bubble away with the day's pottage and supply of pottage. Piles of vegetables wait on rough wooden tables to be chopped. Barrels of flour, various sauces. The head cook, whom you recognise as the tyrant from your chicken plucking ordeal, presides over, stand against one wall, their lids askew, offering an open invitation to weevils and mice. This brings us to this chaos like a battlefield general. He shouts orders, tastes sauces by dipping a grubby finger in, and occasionally stews a fundamental historical fact of the medieval kitchen. It was a place of immense cross-contamination. The same butcher's block used totes a lazy servant with a long wooden spoon. He is the absolute master of this domain. His word is law, and cleave a raw joint of mutton might be used moments later to slice a loaf of bread, with no washing in between. Raw, his temper is legendary. The floor is a treacherous landscape of flagstones slick with grease, water, and animal blood meat juices could easily drip into other ingredients. It's a food safety nightmare. Now for a quirky and rather. You have to watch your step to avoid slipping or tripping over a discarded pile of vegetable peelings. There are no dedicated stomach-turning tidbit about kitchen pests. You're not the only living creature working here. The kitchens are a paradise sanitation stations. A historical fact of kitchen life is that hygiene standards were, by modern sensibilities, appalling. The same wooden for vermin, rats, bold as brass, scurry along the edges of the room, their eyes gleaming in the fire-cutting board, called a trencher board, could be used for raw meat, then fish, then vegetables, with only a cursory wipe down in between. Cross-contamination wasn't a concept, it was a way of life. Light. Mice are a constant presence. And insects are everywhere. A particularly unpleasant ingredient that sometimes made its way into food was verjuice, the highly acidic juice of unripe grapes. It was used as a flavouring agent similar to vinegar. You're handed a stack of dirty pewter platters and pointed toward a large stone sink table, to the coarse dark rye and barley bread for the servants and for making trenchers. Historians still debate there is no hot running water. There is a basin filled with greasy lukewarm water, a coarse rag, and a bucket professional status of a master cook in a great household. Was he considered a skilled artisan, on par with a master mason of sand? You spend the next hour scrubbing, your hands raw from the abrasive sand, trying to remove the cake-don or blacksmith, or was he just a high-ranking domestic servant? The evidence is mixed. Some royal cooks were granted land food from the plates. It's gruelling, unpleasant work. Looking around this hot, smoky and filthy room, you have a new understanding of the food you eat. Every meal that comes out of this kitchen, whether it's the blandest and titles, and became wealthy men in their own right. They possessed complex knowledge of recipes, ingredient sourcing, and managing a pottage or the most glorious feast dish, has passed through this crucible of fire, sweat and grime. It large staff. Yet their work was still considered domestic labour. Their high status was entirely dependent on the lord they served. It's a miracle anyone survives it. You finish the last platter, your back aching, and beat a hasty retreat, a reminder of the rigid social structures you see everywhere. You spend a few more minutes watching this whirlwind of activity, grateful to be out of the inferno and back in the relative calm and fresh air of the main castle. One morning, you wake up with a fiery ache in your throat and a pounding headache. The relentless damp and chill of the castle have finally wormed their way past your defences. You try to get up, but a wave of dizziness sends you collapsing back onto your straw pallet. A fellow servant notices your state, and, with a grim look, fetches the one person in the castle who deals with such matters. The physician, or more likely a local woman who serves as the castle's healer, her knowledge passed down through generations. She arrives, a stern-faced woman with knowing eyes, and examines you with a practiced, if not particularly gentle, hand. She feels your forehead, peers into your throat, and sniffs your breath. She then declares that your humours are out of balance. This is the absolute core of mainstream medieval medical theory. The human body, according to the teachings inherited from the ancient Greeks, like Hippocrates and Galen, was believed to contain 4 essential fluids, or humours: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Each humour was associated with an element: earth, fire, water, air, and a quality: cold and dry, hot and dry, cold and wet, hot and wet. A healthy person had these four humours in perfect equilibrium. Sickness was simply a sign that you had too much or too little of one of them. Your fever and sore throat clearly indicate an excess of blood, which is associated with heat and moisture. The prescribed course of treatment is therefore obvious and immediate. You need to be bled. The healer produces a small, wicked-looking knife called a lancet. With a swift, practiced motion, she makes a small incision on the inside of your arm. She then places a heated glass cup over the cut, creating a vacuum that draws the blood out more quickly. You watch, horrified, as your own vital fluid fills the cup. The theory is that by removing the excess blood, your humours will be restored to balance, and you will recover. In reality, you're being weakened at the very moment your body needs all its strength to fight off the infection. If bleeding doesn't work, the next step is potions. The healer might return with a foul-smelling concoction for you to drink. Medieval pharmacology was a wild mix of herbalism, superstition, and outright quackery. A quirky and rather disgusting tidbit is the use of theriac, a supposedly miraculous cure-all that had been famous since Roman times. One of the key ingredients in the most expensive and sought-after theriac preparations was viper's flesh. But that was just the start. Recipes could include dozens of ingredients, from common herbs and spices to more exotic and stomach-turning items, like animal dung, powdered mummy, or the skulls of executed criminals. The idea was that the more complex and bizarre the recipe, the more powerful the medicine must be. You pray your potion is just simple, bitter herbs. As you lie there, weakened from the bleeding and nauseous from the potion, you're also told to pray. A priest might be summoned to hear your confession. In the medieval mind, sickness was often seen as a punishment from God for some sin. Therefore, spiritual healing was considered just as important, if not more so, than physical treatment. Your recovery depends as much on the state of your soul as it does on the balance of your humours. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval medicine. Was it all just dangerous nonsense, or were there pockets of genuine practical knowledge? The dominant humour-based theory was deeply flawed and often led to harmful treatments like excessive bleeding and purging. However, the herbal lore of local healers often contained effective remedies. For example, willow bark, a common ingredient in folk remedies for pain and fever, contains salicin, the chemical compound later used to create aspirin. So, while the official science of medicine was often deadly, the practical, tradition-based medicine of a village healer might, by sheer trial and error, have stumbled upon treatments that actually worked. Surgery is the option of last resort, and you pray your ailment doesn't require it. Medieval surgery was a brutal, terrifying affair. Anesthesia was non-existent, aside from getting the patient blind drunk or providing a leather strap to bite down on. Surgeons were often barbers, who had the sharp tools and steady hands for the job. They could set broken bones, amputate limbs, and even perform rudimentary brain surgery called trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure. Survival rates were, as you can imagine, abysmal, with infection being the most common cause of death for those who survived the operation itself. You lie on your pallet for days, drifting in and out of a feverish haze. Your fate is now in the hands of a flawed medical theory, a questionable herbal potion, and your own immune system. You see now why so many people in the castle walk with limps, bear jagged scars, or have missing teeth. Surviving illness or injury is a matter of pure dumb luck. The castle offers no real safety net of care. Medicine is a gamble, and the odds are not in your favour. You can only hope that your constitution is strong enough to withstand both the disease and its cure. As you slowly recover from your illness, your senses, dulled by fever, begin to return with a vengeance, and it is your sense of smell that is assaulted first and most profoundly. You realise with a dawning horror that everything in the castle has a smell, and almost none of them are pleasant. The world you now inhabit is a symphony of stench, a constant low-level olfactory assault that you can never truly escape. You start to catalogue the smells as you lie on your pallet. The first and most immediate is the smell of your own small chamber. It's a complex bouquet. There's the musty, slightly sweet odour of the damp straw in your mattress, which you now realise is probably moulding from the bottom up. There's the sharp, sour tang of unwashed human bodies, the dozen people you share the room with, none of whom have bathed recently. and underneath it all is the faint, persistent smell of the chamber pot in the corner, a grim reminder of shared bodily functions in a confined space. When you finally feel strong enough to walk, you step out into the corridor, and the scent profile changes. Here, the dominant note is the cold, damp stone, a smell like a wet basement or a cave. It's mixed with the ubiquitous aroma of wood smoke that permeates everything, clinging to the walls, the tapestries, and every item of clothing. It's not the pleasant, fragrant smoke of a modern campfire. It's a greasy, acrid smoke from the inefficient fireplaces and kitchen fires, a smell that irritates your lungs and makes your eyes water. You descend the spiral staircase toward the great hall, and the smellscape grows richer and more complex. As you get closer, the aroma of the hall itself begins to assert itself. It's the smell of old, spilled ale that has soaked into the wooden tables and the rush-strewn floor. It's the smell of dogs, damp, mangy dogs, and their waste. It's the smell of human sweat and bad breath, amplified by the dozens of people gathered there, and woven through it all is the smell of the rushes themselves, a decaying vegetal odour from the layers of old, trampled and filth-soaked reeds that form a kind of composting carpet underfoot. A famous historical fact is that these rushes were praised by the Dutch scholar Erasmus in the 16th century, not for their freshness, but for their filth. He described English floors as being covered in a disgusting layer of spittle, vomit, the urine of dogs and men, scraps of fish and other filth not fit to be mentioned. Your duties take you out into the bailey, the courtyard, and a whole new world of smells opens up. Here, the primary scent is animal. The sharp, pungent ammonia of horse urine from the stables, the earthy, farm-like smell of the pigs in their stee, and the general odour of chicken droppings that seem to coat every available surface. This is mixed with the industrial smells of the workshops, the metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge, the leathery scent from the tanner, and the yeasty aroma from the bakehouse. And over it all, like a ghastly miasma, is the ever-present stench from the moat, that stagnant sewage-filled ditch you first encountered on your arrival. The direction of the wind determines which of these powerful smells will dominate your senses at any given moment. A quirky and rather specific tidbit about medieval smells is the pomander. This was a small perforated ball, usually made of silver or gold for the wealthy, filled with a mixture of aromatic substances like ambergris, a waxy substance from the intestines of sperm whales, musk, a secretion from musk deer, cloves, and other spices. People would carry these pomanders and hold them to their noses when walking through a particularly smelly area, creating a small, personal bubble of pleasant fragrance to ward off the foul air. The belief was that bad smells, or miasma, could cause disease, so a pomander was considered a form of personal protective equipment. For you, of course, a pomander is an impossible luxury. Your only defence is to breathe through your mouth. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval people were habituated to these smells. Did they simply not notice the stench after a lifetime of exposure, in the same way someone who works in a fish market eventually stops noticing the smell of fish? Or were they acutely aware of it, and constantly battling against it with herbs, pomanders, and incense? The existence of items like pomanders and the heavy use of incense in churches suggests they were indeed sensitive to foul odours, yet the general state of sanitation indicates a high level of tolerance. It's likely they inhabited a middle ground, aware of the worst smells but resigned to the constant pervasive background odour as an unavoidable fact of life. Every person and every object carries this complex scent signature. Your own clothes smell of wood smoke, sweat, and the faint, greasy odour of the kitchen. The wool blanket you sleep under smells of dampness and old dust. The lord and lady, as they walk past, are followed by a cloud of expensive perfume, a desperate and only partially successful attempt to cover up the fundamental smells of the world they inhabit. You realise that to live here is to live in a state of permanent olfactory overload. There is no escape. The stench is in your clothes, in your hair, in your food, and in every breath you take. It is the invisible, inescapable signature of the medieval world. After weeks of living with the grime and the pervasive stench, of feeling a permanent layer of filth on your skin, you begin to fantasize about one simple modern luxury, a hot shower. But in the medieval castle, the concept of a private daily wash is an alien one. Bathing is a rare, complicated, and often very public affair. Your daily hygiene routine, if you can call it that, consists of a quick splash of cold water on your face and hands from a basin in your chamber. The water is drawn from the same questionable well as the drinking water, and the basin is shared by everyone in the room. There is no soap as you would know it. The common person's soap was a harsh, lye-based substance, often made from animal fat and wood ash. It was abrasive and unpleasant, used more for laundry than for personal washing. You mostly just use water and a rough linen cloth to scrub away the most obvious dirt. This does little to combat the deep-seated grime or the smell. For the vast majority of the castle's inhabitants, a full body wash is an extremely infrequent event. It might happen a few times a year, if that. The logistics are simply too difficult. Hauling enough water for a bath and then heating it over a fire is a massive undertaking in terms of labour and fuel. It's a luxury that the castle cannot afford to provide for its dozens, or even hundreds, of servants and soldiers. However, the lord and his family do bathe, and it is a major event. When the lord decides he wants a bath, it sets in motion a flurry of activity. Servants are dispatched to haul bucket after bucket of water, which is heated in the massive kitchen cauldrons. A large wooden tub, looking like a sawn-in half-barrel, is brought into the lord's private chamber, the solar. To protect him from draughts and to add a touch of privacy and luxury, a linen canopy or even a small tent is often erected around the tub. This brings us to a key historical fact about bathing. It was often a social activity for the nobility. The lord might invite a guest to join him in the tub as a sign of camaraderie and trust. He might conduct business from his bath, meeting with his steward or dictating letters. His wife, the lady of the castle, might bathe with her ladies-in-waiting. The tub could even be a romantic setting. Medieval art sometimes depicts a lord and lady sharing a meal on a floating tray while they soak together. For the elite, bath time was a blend of hygiene, business and pleasure. Once the hot water is poured, the bath might be scented with fragrant herbs or flower petals, a further attempt to combat the odours of the castle and add to the luxurious experience. This is where you might come in. As a lower-ranking servant, your role in the lord's bath is to be the bipedal plumbing system, the one who endlessly hauls the buckets of hot water up the winding stairs and then hauls the dirty, lukewarm water back down again. A quirky and slightly surprising tidbit is the existence of public bathhouses, or stews, in medieval towns and cities. These were popular establishments where people could pay to take a hot bath. However, they quickly developed a reputation for being fronts for brothels, and the term stew became synonymous with a house of ill repute. While they offered a chance for town dwellers to get clean, their association with immorality meant that respectable people, particularly women, were often discouraged from frequenting them. A castle, being a self-contained and private fortress, would not have a public bathhouse. Its bathing was a strictly internal affair. You watch the preparations for the lord's bath with a mixture of envy and resentment. The sheer amount of effort involved for one person's comfort is staggering. While the lord soaks in his scented water, protected from draughts, you're still covered in the filth of your daily labour, your skin itching and your hair greasy. Historians still debate the true frequency of medieval bathing. For a long time, the popular image was that people in the Middle Ages never bathed at all. This is an exaggeration. The nobility certainly did, and records show that soap makers were a common feature in many towns. However, the standards were wildly different from our own. A person might be considered clean if they bathed once every few weeks or even months. Cleanliness was more about washing the hands and face, the visible parts, than about full-body immersion. The church also had a complex relationship with bathing, sometimes viewing excessive washing and nudity as a gateway to vanity and sin, which may have discouraged the practice among the devout. After the Lord is finished, if you are incredibly lucky, you and a few other servants might be allowed to use the leftover, now tepid and rather scummy bath water. It's a hand-me-down bath, but it's better than nothing. You might have to share the tub with 2 or 3 other people to make the most of the rapidly cooling water. It's an awkward, public, and not particularly cleansing experience, but it's the only chance you'll get to scrub off weeks of accumulated filth. You use the grimy water and the harsh soap, feeling a small sense of relief as you wash away the top layer of dirt. It's a brief, fleeting moment of feeling almost human again, before you have to dry off with a coarse towel and return to the familiar smelly reality of your life. You've just settled onto your straw pallet for the night, the aches of the day's labour settling into your bones. The room is dark, save for a sliver of moonlight from the window slit. You pull your scratchy wool blanket up to your chin and try to find a comfortable position. Just as you're about to drift off, you feel it, a tiny, distinct itch on your scalp. You scratch it, but a moment later there's another one on your arm, and then a faint rustling sound from the straw beneath you. A horrifying realization dawns on you. You're not alone, and your roommates are not just the dozen other humans in the chamber. Your true, most intimate companions in this castle are a thriving, inescapable population of vermin. The most common and immediate of your new friends are the lice and fleas. They are simply a fact of life. In a world of infrequent bathing and communal living, they are everywhere. Your clothes are infested with them, particularly in the seams of your woolen tunic. Your hair is a playground for them. The straw in your mattress is a bustling metropolis for fleas, which jump from the pallet to you, to the dogs, and to every other person in the castle with democratic impartiality. This is the source of the constant low-grade itching that everyone seems to endure. You see people casually scratching themselves all the time, in the Great Hall in the Bailey during chapel. It's so common it's not even considered rude. A well-established historical fact is that delousing was a regular social activity. You might see two people sitting together, one grooming the other's hair, picking out the lace and knits one by one. It was a practical act of hygiene and a form of social bonding, much like primates grooming each other. The fine-toothed combs made of wood, bone, or ivory that archaeologists frequently find were not for styling hair, but for combing out these persistent pests. Having lice was not necessarily a sign of being poor or exceptionally dirty. Even the highest nobles had to contend with them. Queen Elizabeth I, centuries later, was known to have her own fine combs for the task. The difference was that the wealthy had more resources to combat them, more changes of linen clothes, lice lay eggs in cloth not on hair, more frequent baths and servants to do the delousing for them. You have one tunic and a mattress teeming with new recruits every night. As you lie there, trying to ignore the itching, you hear that rustling sound again, louder this time. Your eyes adjust to the darkness and you see it, a sleek, dark shape scurrying along the wall. A rat, then another. The castle is their kingdom, and you are merely living in it. They are drawn by the same things that sustain you, food and shelter. The kitchens, with their spilled grain and discarded scraps, are their banquet hall. The storerooms are their larders. The thick, hollow walls of the castle provide a network of highways for them to travel unseen. And your chamber, with its crumbs of bread and the warmth of sleeping bodies, is a cosy suburb. A quirky and disturbing tidbit about the castle's rat problem is that they sometimes ended up on the menu, albeit unintentionally. In a dark storeroom or a massive sack of flour, a mouse or a small rat could easily be scooped up with the grain, ground up in the mill and baked into the bread. It was an unwelcome, but likely not uncommon, source of extra protein. The sheer number of them made total prevention impossible. You make a mental note to inspect your bread a little more closely from now on. Beyond the rats, there are the mice, the spiders spinning webs in every corner, and the endless clouds of flies in the summer, drawn by the filth of the moat in the kitchens. Historians still debate the full impact of these pests on medieval health beyond the obvious. We now know that the fleas carried by black rats were the primary vectors for the bubonic plague, the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century. Did medieval people make the connection between rats and disease? For the most part, no. Disease was blamed on miasma, bad air, divine punishment, or an imbalance of the humours, as we've discussed. The rat was seen as a nuisance, a pest that stole food, but not as a deadly harbinger of plague. They were an enemy to be trapped and hunted by the castle's cats and terriers, but their true catastrophic danger was unknown. You pull your blanket tighter, a flimsy defence against the unseen world crawling and scurrying around you. The itching from the fleas is maddening. The thought of a rat running across your face as you sleep is a new and specific horror that will keep you awake. You can hear the gentle gnawing sound of a mouse somewhere in the darkness. This is an intimacy you never wanted. You share your bed with fleas, your clothes with lice, and your home with rats. They are a constant crawling, scratching reminder of the lack of sanitation and the porous boundary between the human world and the animal one. They are your permanent, unwelcome, and inescapable roommates in the grand, filthy ecosystem of the medieval castle. You've been observing the rhythms of castle life for a while now. and a stark reality becomes increasingly clear. While life is hard for everyone, if you are a woman, your world is governed by a completely different, and, in many ways, more restrictive set of rules. For roughly half the population within these stone walls, life is a narrow path, defined by domestic duties, the politics of marriage, and the ever-present life-threatening dangers of childbirth. Let's imagine you're a young woman of noble birth, the Lord's daughter. From the outside, your life seems one of immense privilege. You don't haul water or pluck chickens. You wear fine clothes made of silk and soft wool instead of coarse, scratchy linen. You sleep in a proper bed with curtains, not on a flea-ridden pallet. But your life is not your own. From the moment you were born, you were a political asset, a piece on the great chessboard of feudal alliances. Your primary purpose is to be married off to a suitable husband to forge a strategic alliance, secure land, or end a feud. Your personal feelings on the matter are irrelevant. Your education reflects this reality. You're not taught to wield a sword or study military strategy like your brothers. Instead, you learn the arts of managing a great household. This is a hugely complex job. A mainstream historical fact is that the lady of the castle was its chief domestic officer. When her husband, the lord, was away at war or court, which was often, she was in complete command. She was responsible for overseeing the food supplies, managing the servants, directing the spinning and weaving to clothe the entire household, and even organising the defence of the castle in case of an attack. It was a position of immense responsibility, but it was power exercised entirely within the domestic sphere. Your days are spent in the solar, a private chamber away from the chaos of the Great Hall. Here, with your ladies-in-waiting, you spin thread, weave cloth on a large loom, and do fine embroidery. These are not mere hobbies, they are essential economic activities. The tapestries you create are not just decorations, they are a public display of your family's wealth and your own feminine virtue and skill. Your life is a constant performance of piety, grace, and domestic competence, all designed to make you a more valuable bride. Now for a quirky and rather grim tidbit concerning a noblewoman's freedom. While your marriage is arranged, what happens if your husband dies? As a wealthy widow, you might, for the first time in your life, have a degree of autonomy. You would control your late husband's lands and fortune, at least until you remarried. This made high-status widows some of the most powerful and independent women in the medieval world. However, this freedom was often short-lived. The king or your own family would quickly arrange another marriage for you, eager to get that land and power back under male control. Some determined widows managed to resist, but they were the exception. If you're not a noblewoman, but a servant girl, your life is one of unceasing physical labour. Your world is the kitchen, the laundry, and the nursery. You're at the bottom of the social ladder, and your position is precarious. You're subject to the orders of the lady of the castle, the steward, and the head cook. You're also vulnerable to unwanted advances from the men in the castle, from the lowest stable hand to the lord himself. The power imbalance is absolute, and you have little recourse if you are harassed or assaulted. Your reputation is your only currency, and it is easily lost. For all women in the castle, noble or servant, the greatest danger is childbirth. In an age before modern medicine, antiseptics, or an understanding of germs, the birthing chamber was one of the most dangerous places a woman could be. The birth itself was a purely female affair. Male physicians were rarely, if ever, present. The process was managed by midwives, whose knowledge was based on tradition and experience, not medical science. A complicated birth, a breech baby, or excessive bleeding could quickly become a death sentence for both mother and child. Postpartum infection or childbed fever was rampant and often fatal. A woman who survived to have multiple children was considered both blessed and incredibly lucky. Historians still debate the emotional reality of arranged marriages. Were they the cold, loveless business transactions they appear to be, or could genuine affection and partnership develop over time? The poetry of the era is full of romantic love and chivalry, but this was often focused on courtly love, an idealized non-physical adoration of a lady, often someone else's wife. The reality of marriage was likely far more pragmatic. For a union to be successful, it required respect, shared goals, and the competent running of the household and estate. Love, if it grew at all, was a bonus, not a prerequisite. So, whether you're the lady in the solar, contemplating a marriage to a man you've never met, or a serving girl scrubbing pots in the scullery, your life is circumscribed. Your opportunities are limited by your gender. You see the men training with swords in the bailey, riding out to hunt, and making decisions in the Great Hall. Your domain is inside, your work is domestic, and your future is determined not by your own choices, but by the needs and ambitions of the men who control your world. You are jolted from a shallow, shivering sleep, not by the morning bell, but by a sound that strikes a primal fear into the heart of every castle resident. The frantic, terrified cry of "Fire!" Instantly the dark chamber is filled with panicked shouting. You scramble from your pallet, the smell of acrid smoke already sharp in your nostrils. In a world built of stone, it's easy to feel safe from flames, but that safety is a dangerous illusion. The castle is in reality a perfectly designed death trap, a stone oven waiting for the right kindling. Historians still debate the architectural choices related to fire safety in castles. Were features like detached kitchens and stone-vaulted ground floors deliberate fire prevention measures, or were they just byproducts of other design needs? A stone-vaulted undercroft, for example, provided a strong foundation for the floors above, but it also created a crucial fire break, preventing a fire on the ground floor from easily spreading upwards. It's likely a case of form following function, with fire safety being a happy and often life-saving consequence of sound structural design. You finally burst out into the bailey, gasping for fresh, cool air. You turn and look back at the keep. Flames are now roaring from the window slits of the upper floors. The wooden roof of one of the towers is fully ablaze, a terrifying bonfire against the night sky. The heat is so intense you can feel it even from across the courtyard. You watch as a section of the roof collapses inward, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the air. You survived the immediate danger of the smoke and the crush of bodies, but now you are homeless. You have lost your meagre possessions. The single spare tunic, the wooden cup, all gone. You huddle with the other survivors in the courtyard, a refugee in your own home, watching the fortress burn from the inside out. The fire will rage until it runs out of fuel, leaving behind a blackened, hollowed-out stone shell. The castle, that symbol of impenetrable strength and permanence, has revealed its greatest vulnerability. It wasn't a trebuchet or an army that brought it down, but a simple accidental flame. In the chaotic aftermath of the fire, with nerves frayed and resources stretched thin, you witness another ugly side of castle life, its system of justice. A man is dragged before the Lord Steward in the middle of the bailey, accused of stealing a small sack of flour from the damaged storerooms. There is no courtroom, no jury of his peers, no defence attorney. There is only the accused, his accuser, and the steward, who acts as Section 17 as judge and jury. The justice system here is swift, public, and designed not just to punish the guilty, but to tear in the chaotic aftermath of the fire. With nerves frayed and resources stretched thin, thiefy everyone else into obedience. The man, a lowly servant you recognise from the stables, tearfully pleads his innocence. Social fabric of the castle becomes brittle. Tempers are short, and accusations fly. Someone is blamed for knocking over the candle. He claims he was just moving the sack to a safer location, but a guard claims he saw the man hiding it that started the blaze. A fight breaks out over the last undamaged blanket. In this tense environment you get your first, near his own meagre belongings. It's one man's word against another's. The steward, a grim, unfiltered look at the system of justice that holds this violent world together. And it is swift, brutal, and terrifyingly public. You stumble out into the corridor, which is rapidly filling with thick, choking smoke. People are running, coughing, their faces masks of terror in the flickering orange glow that is beginning to illuminate the far end of the hallway. The very things that make a castle strong against attack, its thick walls, narrow corridors, and easily defended choke points, now become deadly obstacles to escape. The spiral staircases that are so effective against invading soldiers become congested chimneys of smoke and panicked bodies, almost impossible to navigate. The fire isn't in the stone, of course. The fire is in everything else. It's in the wooden beams of the ceiling, dried to a perfect tinder by centuries of smoky air. It's in the heavy woolen tapestries that hang on the walls, which go up in flames like sheets of gasoline-soaked paper, spreading the fire from room to room with terrifying speed. It's in the straw on the floors and in your mattress. It's in the wooden furniture, the barrels in the storeroom, and the timber structures of the roofs and inner buildings. The stone walls of the castle act like a giant fireplace, containing the heat and making it more intense, while the contents provide all the fuel. A core historical fact about medieval life is that fire was a constant and ever-present danger. In cities, with their tightly packed timber-framed houses, a single dropped candle could destroy an entire neighbourhood. The Great Fire of London in 1666 is the most famous example, but similar, smaller-scale disasters were a regular occurrence. In a castle, the risk was just as real. The entire structure is lit by open flame, torches sputtering on the walls, candles on the tables, and the massive roaring hearths in the great hall and kitchen. An errant spark, a tipped-over candle, or a log rolling out of a fireplace is all it takes. You join the desperate human tide trying to get out, to get to the relative safety of the open bailey. The smoke is a physical entity, blinding you, searing your lungs. The heat is becoming unbearable. Panic is the real killer here. People push and shove, their survival instincts overriding any sense of order. You could easily be trampled, crushed against a wall, or fall on the narrow dark stairs. As you fight your way through the chaos, you might notice a quirky and seemingly insane part of the firefighting plan. While some people are focused on escaping, others, particularly the castle steward and his most trusted servants, might be running towards the fire. They aren't trying to put it out. That would be nearly impossible. Instead, they are trying to save the Lord's most valuable possessions. They will risk their lives to rescue the heavy chest containing the castle's money and legal documents, the expensive silver plate from the high table, and the lady's collection of jewels. In the cold calculus of medieval life, these items were often considered more valuable and harder to replace than the lives of a few common servants. Your only hope is the bucket brigade. A line of people is frantically forming, stretching from the well in the bailey to the edge of the blaze. They pass wooden buckets of water from hand to hand, a desperate, valiant, and almost laughably inadequate effort against the raging inferno. A single bucket of water tossed into the heart of the fire evaporates with a hiss, achieving nothing. It's like trying to put out a volcano with a garden hose. This is the extent of their firefighting technology. There are no pumps, no hydrants, no organised fire department. Faced man with little time for nuance listens for a few moments, his expression unreadable. Then he delivers his verdict. Guilty one afternoon, a cry goes up in the bailey. 2 men-at-arms, their faces grim, are. The punishment must be immediate and serve as an example. What happens next depends on the severity of the crime and the dragging a man toward the centre of the courtyard. It's one of the stable hands. He's accused of disposition of the Lord. For a minor offence, the punishment might be a public flogging or time in the stocks. Stealing a silver goblet that went missing from the great hall during the confusion of the fire. The man vehemently protests his innocence, but you see the stocks at the edge of the courtyard. A simple wooden frame with holes for the offender's head and hands. Being locked in the stocks is not just uncomfortable, it's a sentence of profound public humiliation. The victim, his accuser, a haughty squire, is adamant. There will be no lengthy investigation, no defence lawyer, no jury of his helpless, exposed to the elements and the scorn of every passer-by. People would throw rotten vegetables, mud, and his peers. The Lord himself emerges from the temporary quarters he's taken in a less damaged part of the castle, animal dung at them, adding physical misery to their social disgrace. It's a form of punishment that attacks a person's dignity, his face a thunderous mask. He is the judge, jury, and effectively the executioner, he as much as their body. But for theft, especially during a time of crisis, the punishment is likely to be more listens to the squire's accusation and the stable hand's tearful denials for no more than 5 minutes. They are severe. The steward might order the man to be branded with a hot iron, marking him forever as a thief, or he has no evidence presented, other than the squire's word against the stable hands. But the squire is of might decree a mutilation. A well-known historical fact is that medieval justice systems often employed physical mutilation as a punishment, a higher social standing. In this world, that's all the evidence that matters. The Lord pronounces his verdict, that fit the crime. A thief might have a hand cut off. A perjurer or gossip might have their tongue pierced guilty. The punishment is immediate. The stable hand is stripped to the waist and tied to a wooden post that has been erected or cut out. An archer who was caught poaching in the Lord's forest could have his bow fingers chopped off. These punishments were not just cruel, they were a permanent walking advertisement of the Lord's justice, in the bailey for just such occasions. One of the guards produces a thick leather whip. This is a core historical fact of medieval justice. Punishment was a public spectacle. It was not done behind closed doors. Its purpose was not just to punish this case. The steward, eager to quell any further thoughts of looting, declares that the man will be hanged. The sentence is to be carried out immediately. There is no appeal. A rough wooden gallows stands on a small hill just outside the castle wall's guilty party, but to serve as a graphic and terrifying warning to everyone else. The entire castle population, servants, soldiers, are permanent and grim, were said to be rejecting them. They were guilty. It was a terrifying gamble where the outcome often Lord could easily use the court to eliminate rivals, seize land, and terrorize his subjects into submission. Without any hire had more to do with luck and random chance than with divine judgment. By the time of your castle life, this practice authority to appeal to, the common person was entirely at the mercy of their immediate superior. You stand in the silent was becoming less common in formal law, but the principle of divine judgment still lingered. You watch the whipping, unable to look away, crowd, watching the horrible, twitching conclusion of the execution. You don't know if the man was truly guilty, feeling a profound sense of powerlessness. You know, with sickening certainty, that if you were the one accused, you suspect no one really does, except maybe the man himself. What you do know is that you have just witnessed the fate would be the same. Your word means nothing against that of someone of a higher rank. The system is not designed to find the truth, it is designed to uphold the rigid social hierarchy. Historians still debate the effectiveness of this form of brutal, raw, brutal power of the Lord. You have seen that his authority is absolute, and his justice is summary and without public punishment. Did it actually deter crime, or did it simply brutalize the population and foster resentment? On one hand, the mercy. The message is crystal clear. Do not step out of line. Do not challenge the system. Do not break constant threat of swift and horrific punishment. Likely did keep some potential offenders in line. The public nature of the execution, or mutil the rules. The fear instilled by this public spectacle is a far more effective deterrent than any wall or guard. You turn away, sick to your stomach, the image of the hanging man burned into your memory. The stable hand is finally cut down from the post, a broken, bleeding wreck. He is dragged away, his ultimate fate uncertain. He might be banished from the castle, left to die of his wounds, or he might be patched up and forced back to work, his scarred back a permanent testament. You thought the fire was the worst thing that could happen. You were wrong. One morning, the watchman on the highest tower lets out a long, terrifying blast on his horn. It's not the signal for the changing of the guard or the arrival of a friendly visitor. It's the alarm. An army is approaching. Panic, cold and sharp, grips the castle, a fear far deeper than the one you felt during the fire. The gates are slammed shut, the heavy drawbridge is winched up with a groan of protesting wooden chain, and the iron portcullis crashes down. You are now trapped. This stone fortress is no longer your home or your workplace. It has become your prison and a tomb for many of you. The siege has begun. Landmark. The condemned man, wailing with terror and still protesting his innocence, is dragged by. Even the children is expected to gather and watch. It is a mandatory lesson in obedience. The first lash the guards towards the gate. The entire castle population is expected to watch. Public execution was a form of mass entertainment and cracks across the man's back, and he screams. A dark red welt immediately rises on his skin. You feel a powerful tool of social control. A quirky and rather macabre tidbit of medieval law was trial by ordeal. Inch. A knot of sickness tightening in your stomach. The crowd is silent. Their faces a mixture of pity, fear, and if a person's guilt or innocence could not be determined by evidence or witnesses, they might be subjected to an ordeal, a physical test administered by the church. The accused might have to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set distance or a grim sort of fascination. The lashing continues, each strike of the whip methodically peeling away skin until the man's back is a raw, bloody mess. His screams have subsided into agonized moans. This is justice for a retriever stoned from a cauldron of boiling water. Their hand would then be bandaged and sealed. After 3 days, the simple, unproven theft. For more serious crimes, the punishments were even more horrific. Murderers or traitors could expect bandage was removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, it was a sign from God that they were innocent. If it was infected and festering, they were guilty. Trial by ordeal was officially outlawed by the Pope in 1221 to be hanged, drawn and quartered. A gruesome process of being hanged until almost dead, disemboweled while 5, but similar folk practices and superstitions lingered for centuries. The crowd follows the guards and the condemned man out still alive, and then having their limbs cut off and their head displayed on a spike. Thieves might have a hand cut off. To the gallows hill, there is a priest present, offering last rites, but it is a rushed, perfunctory affair. Those caught poaching in the Lord's forest could be blinded or castrated. The cruelty was the point. It was meant, the man is forced up the ladder, a rope is placed around his neck, and then he is simply pushed off. To inspire terror and maintain order through fear. A quirky and rather bizarre aspect of the medieval legal system was, it is not the clean, instantaneous neck snap of a modern long drop hanging. It is a slow trial by ordeal. This was an appeal to God to determine guilt or innocence. It was often used when there was no clear evidence agonizing death by strangulation, a ghastly spectacle that can take many minutes. Historians still debate the true. An accused person might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set distance. Trial by fire, fairness, of the manorial courts, the system of local justice administered by lords and their stewards. In theory, the system will be submerged in a body of water, trial by water. If their hand healed cleanly after a few days, or if they was based on local custom and precedent. But in practice, it was highly susceptible to the biases, moods, and personal interests sank in the water. They were declared innocent, as God had intervened to protect them. If the wound became infected, or if of the person in charge. A kind and fair-minded lord might oversee a relatively just system. A cruel or greedy they floated, as the pure water. The initial days are a flurry of organised chaos. The lord and his knights, clad in mail and steel, direct the defence from the battlements. Every able-bodied man, including you, is pressed into service. Your new job might be to haul heavy stones and pots of pitch up the winding stairs to the top of the walls, ready to be dropped on the enemy below. Or you might be tasked with carrying endless buckets of water, not for drinking, but to douse the fires that will inevitably be started by flaming arrows. The air is thick with tension and the sounds of war. The rhythmic thud of enemy trebuchets hurling massive stones against the walls. The crack of arrows striking stone, and the distant menacing shouts of the besieging army. At first there's a sense of defiant confidence. The walls are thick, the food stores are full, and the well is deep. The castle was built for this. But as days turn into weeks, a new, more insidious enemy begins to emerge from within the walls: hunger. The food stores, which seemed so vast, are finite. The rations are cut. The already bland pottage becomes thinner, more watery. The bread is made with less flour and more filler, like ground-up beans or sawdust. You are constantly, gnawingly hungry. You see the castle's precious livestock, the pigs, the chickens, the lord's own warhorses, slaughtered one by one for food. The dogs that once roamed the great hall disappear, their barking silenced, their flesh added to the communal stew pot. Then comes the thirst. While the well provides water, it is, as you know, of questionable quality. With hundreds of people now confined to the castle, drinking more from it than ever, and with the general sanitation deteriorating rapidly, the well becomes a breeding ground for disease. This is the great historical fact of siege warfare. More defenders died from disease and starvation than from direct enemy action. Dysentery, the bloody flux, sweeps through the castle. The cramped, filthy conditions are a perfect incubator. People become weak, dehydrated, and feverish. The small infirmary is overwhelmed. The daily death toll begins to rise, not from arrows or stones, but from sickness. A quirky and truly desperate tidbit from historical sieges is the creative and often disgusting things people ate to survive. When the dogs, cats, and horses were gone, they turned to the rats and mice you've come to know so well. They would boil leather boots and shields to create a gelatinous, foul-tasting soup. They would eat grass and weeds that grew in the cracks of the courtyard stones. In the most extreme and horrific circumstances, there are documented accounts of cannibalism. The choice became one of starvation or the ultimate taboo. The psychological toll is immense. You're trapped in a crowded, stinking, disease-ridden pressure cooker. The constant bombardment from the enemy trebuchets is a nerve-shredding torment. Each impact shakes the very foundations of the castle, sending dust and stone fragments raining down. You can't sleep, you can't rest. The hope of a relief army coming to save you dwindles with each passing day. Fights break out over scraps of food. The rigid social order begins to fray as desperation sets in. Historians still debate the most effective strategies for breaking a siege. Was it all-out assault, or was it simply waiting? While dramatic attacks with siege towers and battering rams make for exciting stories, the most common and effective tactic was simply to starve the defenders out. A well-supplied castle could hold out for months, even a year, but no fortress was truly self-sufficient forever. The besieging army had access to the entire countryside for food and supplies, while you were limited to what was trapped inside the walls with you. A patient general knew that time, hunger, and disease were his most powerful weapons. You look at the faces around you. They are gaunt, pale, and etched with despair. The healthy bravado of the first few days is gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed resignation. The lord still stands on the walls, but he looks thinner, his armour hanging loosely on his frame. You no longer see the castle as a fortress of strength. You see it for what it has become, a giant stone coffin. The enemy is no longer just the army outside the walls. The real enemy is the hunger in your belly, the fever in your blood, and the despair in your heart. You don't know how it will end, with a final bloody assault, a negotiated surrender, or a slow, quiet death from starvation. But you know that even if you survive, you will be haunted by the horrors you've witnessed within these besieged walls forever. Let's imagine the siege has been broken. A relief army arrived at the last moment, or the enemy simply gave up and moved on. The gates creak open, and life, scarred and limping, begins to return to a semblance of normality. One thing is certain. The Lord is determined never to be caught so vulnerable again. He orders a renewed focus on military readiness. For you, this means your days of hauling water or plucking chickens are over. You've been conscripted into the castle's garrison. You're going to learn how to fight, and you quickly discover that it is not the glorious chivalrous adventure of song and story. It is a painful, exhausting, and dangerous full-time job. Your training begins not with a sword, but with a staff. You and a dozen other clumsy recruits are herded into the bailey, each handed a long, heavy wooden pole. The master-at-arms, a grizzled veteran with a network of scars and a vocabulary consisting mostly of creative insults, puts you through endless repetitive drills. You practice blocks, thrusts, and strikes until your arms feel like lead and your shoulders burn with an agony you've never known. The staff smacks against your knuckles, raising painful welts. You are clumsy and slow, and the master-at-arms takes great pleasure in demonstrating a technique by landing a sharp, stinging blow on your ribs. There is no positive reinforcement here, only the fear of pain and humiliation. Next, you might graduate to the spear, and then, if you show any aptitude at all, to the sword. The sword you are given is not a knight's elegant longsword. It is a short, heavy, utilitarian weapon called an arming sword. It's a crude, brutal tool designed for hacking and thrusting in the chaos of close-quarters combat. You train with a buckler, a small round shield strapped to your forearm. The drills are endless. Lunge, parry, block, riposte, over and over again. Your practice partner is just as inexperienced as you are, and accidents are common. A mistimed block can result in a cracked finger or a split lip from the wooden practice sword. The most famous historical fact about medieval combat training is its sheer physicality. A knight in full plate armour was a formidable fighting machine, but that armour could weigh over 50 pounds. To fight effectively in it required immense strength and stamina. Knights trained from boyhood, starting with wrestling and horsemanship, and gradually building up to wielding heavy weapons in full armour. They were the Olympic athletes of their day. You're a peasant who was malnourished a month ago. The gulf in skill and conditioning is astronomical. After hours of melee training, you are sent to the archery butts. This is where you learn to use the weapon that truly dominated many medieval battlefields, the longbow. A quirky but crucial tidbit about the English longbow is that it wasn't just a weapon. It was a physically deforming piece of equipment. The bow had a draw weight of anywhere from 100 to over 180 pounds. To draw it required not just arm strength, but the powerful muscles of the back and shoulders. Archers trained for years to develop this strength, and skeletal remains of medieval longbowmen found on battlefields like Towton show they had visibly overdeveloped left arms, thickened bone in their shoulders and spines, and often stress fractures. Their skeletons are permanently marked by their profession. You are handed a weaker bow, perhaps with a 70-pound draw. You can barely pull the string back to your ear. Your fingers, raw and clumsy on the bowstring, shake with the effort. The master archer shows you the proper stance, the way to knock draw loose. Your first arrow wobbles pathetically and lands 20 feet in front of you. The other recruits laugh. You try again. The bowstring catches your forearm, leaving a painful burning welt. You spend hours at this, and by the end of the day your fingers are raw and bleeding, and the muscles in your back are screaming in protest. It will take you months, if not years, of constant practice to become even moderately proficient, capable of loosing several arrows a minute with any degree of accuracy. Historians still debate the social status of the longbowmen. While knights and men-at-arms were the aristocratic elite of the army, skilled archers were a vital and often well-paid component. Were they considered professional soldiers, respected for their deadly skill, or were they seen as low-born yeomen, a necessary but ultimately disposable part of the war machine? The reality is likely somewhere in between. On the battlefield, their ability to rain death from a distance was highly valued, but in the rigid social hierarchy of the castle, they would never be a knight's equal. Your life is now a cycle of pain. You wake up aching from the previous day's exertions, and you go to sleep even more so. You're perpetually bruised and blistered. Your diet is still the same bland pottage, which provides calories but feels woefully inadequate for the physical demands being placed upon you. You're no longer just a servant, you are a weapon being forged. The process is brutal and dehumanizing. You see the knights practicing separately, elegantly jousting in the tilt yard. Theirs is a world of chivalry and honour, yours is a world of sweat, pain, and the constant nagging fear that one day you will have to use these skills for real, in a terrifying, chaotic battle where your chances of survival are slim to none. Your new life as a trainee man-at-arms gives you a different perspective on the castle. You spend more time on the battlements, looking out not in fear, but with a sense of duty. And from this vantage point, you see the world that supports your own existence. Beyond the moat, beyond the immediate fields belonging to the castle, lies a small huddled village of thatched roof cottages. This is where the peasants live, the farmers, the millers, the serfs who are tied to this land, and you begin to understand a fundamental truth. As hard as your life is inside these stone walls, theirs is infinitely harder. The castle does not exist in a vacuum. It is the centre of a vast economic web, and that web is woven from the labour of the peasantry. They are the ones who till the fields, sow the seeds, and harvest the grain that becomes your bread and the barley for your ale. They are the ones who raise the livestock that is slaughtered for the Lord's feasts. They are the foundation upon which the entire feudal system is built. You live in the castle, a symbol of power, but that power is drawn directly from the sweat and toil of the people in the village below. You watch them from the walls. Their day starts before yours and it ends long after. You see them in the fields, bent over from dawn till dusk, their movements slow and methodical. Their tools are simple and crude. A heavy wooden plough, perhaps pulled by a gaunt-looking ox, a scythe, a sickle. The work is back-breaking and relentless. A single bad harvest caused by too much rain or a prolonged drought means starvation. Not the temporary strategic hunger of a siege, but a deep, widespread and lethal famine. A bedrock historical fact of this era is the system of serfdom. Many of the peasants you see are not free. They are serfs, legally bound to the land owned by your lord. They cannot leave without his permission. They cannot marry without his approval. They owe him a significant portion of their labour, working on his personal lands, the domain, for a set number of days each week without pay. On top of that, they must pay him a percentage of everything they produce on their own small plot of land. They are not quite slaves, but they are very far from free. You might venture out of the castle gates one afternoon. perhaps on an errand to the village blacksmith. Walking through the village is an assault on the senses that rivals the castle itself. The streets are narrow, muddy tracks choked with animal and human waste. The cottages are small, dark, one-room hovels, often shared with the family's livestock in the winter for warmth. They are made of wattle and daub, a woven lattice of wooden strips daubed with a sticky mixture of wet soil, clay, sand, straw, and animal dung. The roofs are thatched straw. There are no windows, just a hole in the roof to let out the smoke from the central fire pit. The poverty is absolute and overwhelming. A quirky and telling detail of peasant life is the pingle. This was a tiny enclosed plot of land, often just a small garden next to the cottage, which the family could cultivate for their own private use. It was here they grew the vegetables for their pottage and perhaps kept a pig or a few chickens. This little garden was often the difference between survival and starvation, a small pocket of personal effort in a life otherwise dominated by obligation to the Lord. Looking at these people, you see your own life in a new light. Your flea-ridden straw pallet in a shared stone chamber suddenly seems like a luxury compared to sleeping on a dirt floor with a cow. Your daily ration of bland pottage is a guaranteed meal, a certainty these people do not have. The stone walls that sometimes feel like a prison also provide a level of security that the villagers can only dream of. When raiders or a rival lord's army sweeps through the land, it is their village that will be burned, their meagre possessions looted, and their lives threatened. They will flee to the castle for protection, becoming desperate refugees, while you stand on the walls, a defender. Historians still debate the degree of peasant agency and resistance. Was their life one of total, passive subjugation, or did they have ways of fighting back? Outright rebellion was rare and usually brutally suppressed, but there were smaller, more subtle forms of resistance. They might work slowly and inefficiently on the Lord's domain. They might hide a portion of their harvest to avoid giving it as tax. They might appeal to tradition and local custom to push back against a lord's unreasonable demands. They were not just passive victims. They were engaged in a constant low-level negotiation of power with their masters. You return to the castle as the sun sets, the gate closing behind you with a reassuring thud. The comfort and security of the castle, which you have so often cursed, now feel like a profound privilege. You are part of the system that exploits these people. Your luxurious existence, with its relative safety and guaranteed food, is paid for by their endless grinding poverty. You are a guard, a soldier, part of the apparatus of force that ensures they stay in the fields, working the land that feeds you all. The castle is not just a fortress against outside enemies. It is also a fortress of power, looming over the village, a constant stony reminder to the peasants of their place in the world and of yours. The weeks of grueling weapons training and the grim reality of life outside the walls leave you feeling weary and demoralized. The brief excitement of the feast is a distant memory, and the daily routine is a monotonous cycle of work, sleep, and bland food. You begin to wonder how people fight off the soul-crushing boredom. What do they do for fun? The answer, you discover, is as crude, loud, and lacking in refinement as everything else in the castle. One evening, after the trestle tables are cleared in the great hall, the Lord calls for entertainment. This doesn't mean a sophisticated play or a concert. It means the jester is summoned. He's a man named Wat, whose face is painted in a grotesque grin. He wears a fool's motley costume and a cap with ringing bells. His job is to be the castle's one-man variety show. He juggles, he does clumsy acrobatics, and most importantly, he tells jokes. But this is not witty, observational humour. It's a barrage of crude, slapstick, and often cruel jests. He makes fun of the head cooks, baldness. He tells a series of bawdy, explicit jokes about a farmer's daughter and a priest that make the men-at-arms roar with laughter. He even dares to make a few gentle jabs at the Lord himself, a licensed fool being one of the few people who could get away with such a thing. This is a central historical fact about medieval entertainment. It was rarely subtle. Humour was broad, physical, and often relied on making fun of people's misfortunes or physical deformities. The sophisticated wordplay of a Shakespearean fool was a much later development. Your castle jester is more like a modern-day insult comic combined with a circus clown, his primary tools being vulgarity and pratfalls. After the jester, the minstrel takes over. Remember him from the feast? He's back with his lute. But he doesn't have an endless repertoire. He knows a handful of songs and he plays them every single night. You hear the same epic ballad, about a legendary knight slaying a dragon so many times you know all the words by heart. You hear the same mournful love song about a lady with golden hair. The music is a welcome change from the Jesters shouting, but the repetition is mind-numbing. It's the medieval equivalent of a bar that only has 3 songs on its jukebox. When the professionals are done, the amateurs take over. One of the squires might be cajoled into singing a popular, and usually very rude, folk song. 2 burly men-at-arms might start a wrestling match in the middle of the floor, egged on by the cheering, ale-soaked crowd. Gambling is rampant. Men huddle in corners, playing dice games with names like Hazard, their meagre pay for the month changing hands on a single roll. These games often end in heated arguments and accusations of cheating, which sometimes escalate into bloody brawls. A quirky tidbit about medieval games is the popularity of a board game called the Philosopher's Game, or Rhythmomachia. It was an incredibly complex mathematical game, a sort of advanced version of chess, played on a board resembling 2 chessboards joined together. It was popular among educated clergy and university scholars, but would have been completely incomprehensible to almost everyone in your castle. While the intellectuals were engaged in complex numerical combat, you are watching 2 drunkards try to wrestle a pig. Your leisure options are far more rustic. Board games like chess and backgammon, or tables, were popular, but the finely carved sets were for the nobility. You might play a simpler game like Nine Men's Morris, its boards scratched directly into a wooden bench or a stone floor. What about sports? When the weather is good, the bailey might be cleared for a brutal, chaotic game of medieval football. This wasn't a game of rules and strategy. It was a semi-organised riot, with dozens, sometimes hundreds of players. The ball was an inflated pig's bladder. The goals could be miles apart, and the objective was simply to get the ball to your goal by any means necessary. Kicking, punching, carrying and tackling. Injuries were common, and deaths were not unheard of. It was less a sport and more a way for young men to channel their aggression in a socially acceptable, albeit violent way. Historians still debate the purpose and function of leisure in the medieval period. Was it purely for rest and recuperation, or did it serve a deeper social purpose? It seems clear that most entertainment reinforced the existing social order. The lord sits and observes the foolishness, a benevolent master presiding over his unruly household. The songs praise the knightly class. The brutal sports prepare men for the violence of war. Even the jester's jokes, by gently mocking the powerful, act as a safety valve, releasing social tension without actually challenging the structure of power. You sit on the bench, nursing your cup of small beer, watching the chaos unfold. The air is thick with smoke, sweat and spilled ale. The noise is deafening. This is as good as it gets. This is how you escape the crushing weight of your existence for a few hours. There are no books for you to read, no art for you to appreciate, no new stories for you to hear. There is only the same crude joke, the same repetitive song and the same drunken brawl. It's a brief, loud and messy respite, a way to fight off the darkness and the boredom before the bell rings and another day of labour begins. As you navigate your daily life in the castle, you become aware of an invisible but all-powerful force that governs every action and thought. It's a deeper current than the Lord's authority or the fear of punishment. It is a world saturated with superstition. Every shadow, every strange noise, every twist of fate is interpreted through a lens of supernatural belief. You live in a state of constant low-level fear, not just of your human masters, but of the demons, witches, and angry spirits that you believe inhabit the world alongside you. The official religion of the castle is, of course, Christianity. You attend Mass in the cold stone chapel, listening to the priest chant in Latin, a language you don't understand. You kneel, you cross yourself, and you pray to a God who feels very distant and formal. The church provides a structure for your year, the feast days, the fasting, the holy seasons of Advent and Lent. But alongside this formal religion is a much older, more personal, and often more terrifying set of beliefs. This is a well-established historical fact. For the common person in the Middle Ages, Christianity and folk superstition were deeply intertwined. The world was seen as a battleground between the forces of God and the forces of Satan, and that battle was taking place all around you, all the time. A sudden illness wasn't just a result of bad humours. It could be the work of a demon that had taken root in your body. A cow that suddenly stops giving milk hasn't just fallen ill, it has been cursed by a witch. You see evidence of this everywhere. When a thunderstorm rolls in, the priest will frantically ring the chapel bells. This isn't just to call people to prayer, it's believed that the blessed sound of the bells can drive away the demons that were thought to ride on the wind and create the storm. You see small protective charms called amulets, tied to the manes of the Lord's horses to ward off evil spirits. People mutter prayers and make the sign of the cross when they hear an owl hoot at night, as it's considered a terrible omen. Your life is governed by 1,000 tiny rituals designed to ward off bad luck. You learn never to stir a pot counterclockwise, as that's the widdershins or witch's way. You know that a crow flying over the castle is a sign of impending death. If you spill salt, you must immediately throw a pinch over your left shoulder to blind the devil who is always lurking there, waiting for an opportunity to cause mischief. These aren't quaint customs, they are taken with deadly seriousness. A failure to perform the correct ritual could invite disaster. A quirky and fascinating tidbit of this superstitious world is the Sin Eater. This was a person who, through a ritual, would take on the sins of a recently deceased person. A loaf of bread and a bowl of ale would be passed over the dead body and then given to the Sin Eater to consume. It was believed that the food and drink would absorb the sins of the departed, allowing their soul to pass into heaven without being weighed down. The Sin Eater, in turn, would be paid a small fee for taking this spiritual burden onto themselves. They were often poor outcasts, performing a service that was both essential and terrifying to the community. The darkest side of this superstitious worldview is the fear of witchcraft. In the village, there might be an old woman who lives alone, who knows a bit too much about herbs, whose cat seems a little too familiar. She becomes the target of suspicion. If there's a crop failure or a series of unexplained illnesses, the whispers will start. She is a witch. She has made a pact with the devil. She is the cause of all their misfortune. This fear can quickly escalate into a full-blown witch hunt, a paranoid frenzy that ends with the accused being subjected to trial by ordeal or being burned at the stake. While the great European witch craze was more of an early modern phenomenon, the underlying beliefs and fears that fueled it were firmly established in your medieval world. Historians still debate how the Church officially dealt with these deeply ingrained folk beliefs. On one hand, the Church actively tried to stamp out pagan practices and superstitions, condemning them as demonic. On the other hand, it often incorporated them into a Christian framework. Pagan holy sites like wells or groves were rededicated to Christian saints. Folk festivals were absorbed into the Christian calendar. The Church understood that it couldn't simply erase centuries of belief, so it often chose to co-opt and Christianize it instead, creating the unique and often contradictory blend of faith and folklore that defines your world. You live in a state of constant vigilance. You're afraid of the Lord, but you're also afraid of the fairy folk who might steal your child from its cradle. You're afraid of the enemy army, but you're also afraid of the ghost of a restless spirit said to haunt the castle's dungeon. The world is an enchanted, but also deeply menacing place. Every unexplained event has a supernatural cause, and danger lurks not just in the physical world, but in the unseen realm of spirits and demons that is all around you. This fear is as real and as powerful as the stone walls of the castle itself. Day by day, week by week, you have come to understand the unwritten, but unbreakable law of the castle. Everyone has a place, and everyone is in their place. The world is a great ladder, created by God, and you were born onto a specific rung. The chances of you climbing to a higher one are almost zero. This is the rigid, unyielding social hierarchy that defines every aspect of your existence. At the very top, so high he seems to be in a different world, is the Lord. He is not just the richest or most powerful man in the castle. His authority is believed to be granted by God. He is a vassal to a greater lord or the king, holding this land in exchange for military service. This is the essence of the feudal system, a pyramid of loyalty and obligation. The Lord's power is absolute. He is the law, as you saw so brutally demonstrated in the Bailey. His comfort, his needs, and his ambitions drive the entire engine of the castle. Just below him is his immediate family, his wife, the lady of the castle, and their children. They share in his status and privilege, living a life of relative luxury, set apart from everyone else on the dais in the Great Hall. They are the Blue Bloods, the inheritors of the power. Below them are the knights. These are men of noble birth, professional warriors who have sworn an oath of fealty to the Lord. They are the castle's elite fighting force. They have their own servants called squires, who are usually the sons of other noble families, learning the trade of war. You watch them train, and you see the immense gulf between their graceful, skilled movements and your own clumsy efforts. They follow a code of chivalry, which dictates how they should behave in battle and in court. This code is a famous historical fact of the era, but as you observe it, you see it's a code that applies almost exclusively to their interactions with other nobles. It does not extend to you or the peasants in the village. Next on the ladder are the senior officials who run the castle on a day-to-day basis, the steward, who manages the estate and its finances, the marshal, who is in charge of the stables and horses, and the chaplain, who sees to the spiritual well-being of the household. These are often educated men, sometimes men of the cloth, who hold positions of significant trust and authority. They are the middle management of the feudal enterprise, and then there is you. You belong to the vast, sprawling category of servants, soldiers, and craftsmen. You are a varlet, or a groom, or a garçon, all terms for the lower echelons of castle staff. Within your own rank there are subtle hierarchies. The head cook is a king in his own kitchen, a tyrant to the scullery maids. The master-at-arms can command any common soldier. But to the nobles you're all just part of the faceless background, the staff. You're essential, but you're also expendable. Your individual identity is submerged into your function. You're not John, you're the boy who turns the spit. A quirky linguistic tidbit that reveals this class division is the origin of some of our modern English words for meat. The peasants who raised the animals used the Anglo-Saxon words hasikokat, cow, swen, swine, and seep, sheep. The French-speaking Norman lords who ate the animals used their words for the cooked meat: boeuf, beef, pork, and mouton, mutton. The very language you speak is stratified, a living remnant of the Norman conquest and the class division it imposed. At the absolute bottom of the ladder are the peasants and serfs who live outside the walls, the foundation of the entire structure. Your position as a castle servant, as miserable as it often is still a step above theirs. You have a stone roof over your head and a guaranteed, if meagre, meal. It's a small distinction, but in this world, it's a significant one. Can you ever move up this ladder? It is incredibly difficult. Historians still debate the true extent of social mobility in the Middle Ages. While the class boundaries were rigid, they were not entirely impermeable. The most common path for advancement was through the church. A bright, clever boy from a peasant family, if he was lucky enough to receive an education, could potentially rise through the ecclesiastical ranks to become a priest, a bishop, or even a trusted advisor to a king. The church was, in theory, a meritocracy. The other path was through war. A common soldier who displayed exceptional bravery and skill in battle might be noticed by the lord and rewarded with a small plot of land or a higher position, perhaps even being knighted on the battlefield. But these were lottery ticket chances, the stuff of legends. For everyone who succeeded, thousands did not. For you, the reality is that you will likely live and die in the same station you were born into. You will serve the Lord, and your children, if you have them, will serve his children. Your world is small and circumscribed. Your horizons are limited by the stone walls of the castle and the invisible but even more powerful walls of the social hierarchy. You look up at the Lord on his high table, and the distance between you feels as vast and uncrossable as the distance to the moon. You were born to serve, and that is all you can ever expect to be. Years pass, the seasons turn, each bringing its familiar cycle of hardship and toil. You're no longer the bewildered newcomer. You're a hardened resident of the castle, your body scarred by training, your mind calloused by the daily grind. The castle, once a place of terrifying strangeness, is now simply your world. You have accepted its cold, its filth, its rigid order. You have survived. But the world outside the stone walls is changing, and a new sound is beginning to echo across the battlefields of Europe, a sound that will spell the end of your world. It starts as a rumour, a story brought back by a knight returning from a war in France. He speaks of a new weapon, a devilish invention of smoke and thunder. He describes a metal tube that, with a flash and a deafening roar, can spit out a solid iron ball with enough force to shatter a shield and punch through a knight's armour. Most people in the Great Hall dismiss it as a traveller's tall tale, a fantasy. But the Lord listens intently, a thoughtful, worried look on his face, arranged marriages and perilous childbirth. You have seen the suffering of the peasants, whose labour supported your miserable existence. The castle was not a home, it was a machine for projecting power, for waging war, and for enforcing a rigid social order. You were just one of its many moving parts, a small replaceable cog in a vast and indifferent mechanism. It was a life lived without privacy, without real comfort, and, for most, without hope of change. It was a world ruled by superstition, where every shadow held a potential threat, and every misfortune had a supernatural cause. As our journey together comes to a close, the sharp, vivid images of this life begin to soften. The deafening noise of the bailey fades, the choking smoke of the great hall dissipates, and the biting cold of the stone walls begins to lose its edge. The harsh realities of the medieval castle, with all its discomfort and its dangers, recede into the quiet corridors of history, becoming faint echoes in a fortress of memory. Let the drawbridge rise on these troubling thoughts, securing them in the past where they belong. The world you have just visited was one of struggle and survival, a life of constant hardship under a lord's unyielding authority, a stark contrast to the comfort and safety of your own bed. But that world is now distant, a story that has been told. The guards on the battlements are fading into the twilight, their watch now over. The flickering torchlight in the hallways softens to a gentle, distant glow. The clamour of the great hall is replaced by a peaceful, deep silence, and the great stone keep itself seems to dissolve into the soft, quiet darkness of the approaching night. All that remains now is for you to let go, to allow the heavy gates of slumber to close, and to drift into a peaceful, well-deserved rest. Your own fortress of dreams awaits, a sanctuary far warmer and safer than any castle of old. Then, one day, you see it for yourself. A master founder arrives at the castle, a secretive, important man with soot-stained hands and a team of skilled artisans. He is a gunsmith, and he has been hired by the lord at great expense. In a secure, guarded workshop in the bailey, he sets up a forge and begins his mysterious work. He melts down bronze and iron in a fiercely hot furnace, pouring the molten metal into complex clay moulds. The process is loud, hot, and dangerous. After weeks of work, the new weapon is unveiled. It's a crude, heavy-looking cannon, little more than a thick iron tube mounted on a clumsy wooden carriage. It's not elegant like a sword or a bow. It's a squat, ugly, brutal thing. The lord and his entire household gather at a safe distance in the bailey to witness the first test firing. The master founder and his assistants load the weapon. They stuff a measure of black powder, a foul-smelling mixture of sulphur, charcoal and saltpetre, down the barrel, followed by a wad of cloth and a round, heavy stone ball. One of the assistants brings a long, slow-burning match. The master founder shouts a warning. The assistant touches the match to a small hole at the back of the cannon. The result is instantaneous and terrifying. There is a tremendous, ear-splitting boom that is deeper and louder than anything you have ever heard. It's a physical concussion that you feel in your chest. A huge cloud of thick, white, acrid smoke erupts from the barrel, momentarily obscuring everything. And across the bailey, the stone ball, which had been aimed at a specially constructed practice wall, smashes into its target. The heavy stones of the wall don't just chip, they shatter, exploding inward with incredible force. A stunned silence hangs over the courtyard, broken only by the ringing in your ears. The power you have just witnessed is of a completely different order of magnitude from anything you know. A trebuchet can hurl a stone that will weaken a wall over time. This new weapon can pulverize it in an instant. This is the historical fact that changed the world. The arrival of gunpowder rendered the traditional stone castle obsolete. For 1,000 years, the high, thick wall was the ultimate defence. Gunpowder ended that dominance forever. A quirky and initially counterintuitive aspect of this transition was the development of keyhole gun ports. As firearms became more common, architects began building special openings in castle walls for defenders to shoot from. These often had a round hole for the gun barrel to poke through, with a narrow vertical slit above it for sighting. The shape looks remarkably like an old-fashioned keyhole. It's an ironic symbol. The very walls that were becoming obsolete were being modified with the symbol of their own undoing. You look at the stunned faces of the knights. They, with their shining armour and their code of chivalry, are masters of a certain kind of warfare, a world of lances, swords and personal valour. But what good is a shield against a cannonball? What good is a lifetime of training when you can be killed from a distance by a peasant with a simple tube and a measure of black powder? The age of the knight, like the age of the castle, is beginning to fade. Historians still debate the speed of this military revolution. Was the transition from castles and knights to cannons and infantry a rapid, dramatic shift, or a slow, gradual evolution over several centuries? The evidence suggests it was a slow burn. Early cannons were unreliable, inaccurate, and slow to reload. A well-defended castle could still withstand a siege from an army with primitive artillery. But the trajectory was clear. As cannons became bigger, more powerful, and more mobile, the balance of power shifted decisively from the defender to the attacker. Building a stone wall high was no longer the answer. In fact, high walls made a better target. The future of fortification would be low, squat, star-shaped forts designed to deflect cannon fire, not tower over the landscape. The lord, to his credit, understands what he has just seen. He has purchased this weapon to defend his castle, but he knows, as he stares at the smoking hole in the practice wall, that it is the beginning of the end. The power that has been concentrated within these stone walls for centuries is about to be broken. The world is getting louder, faster, and more impersonally deadly. The future belongs not to the man in the stone tower, but to the man with the biggest cannon. You look up at the familiar, imposing walls of your home, and for the first time they seem fragile. The cannon sits in the bailey, a dark and silent prophecy of the world to come. The castle, which once felt like the centre of the universe, now feels like a relic. The Lord's power is no longer absolute. It is challenged by the changing tides of technology and politics. The world is growing larger, and the isolated, self-contained fortress is becoming an anachronism. As you stand on the battlements one last time, looking out over the fields, you reflect on the harsh realities you have witnessed. The fantasy you might have once held of gleaming spires and noble knights has been scoured away by a relentless reality. You remember the bone-deep chill that no fire could ever truly banish, a cold that emanated from the very stones themselves. You recall the incessant maddening itch of the lice and fleas that were your constant companions, a reminder that you were never truly alone. You can still taste the bland, monotonous pottage, the fuel of a life of servitude, and you can still smell the eye-watering stench of the garderobe, a symbol of the filth that permeated every corner of this world. You think of the Great Hall, which appeared so grand from a distance, but was in truth a chaotic, smoky and filthy cafeteria. You remember the terror of the fire, the claustrophobic panic of being trapped in the stone labyrinth. You recall the horror of the siege, the gnawing hunger and the creeping dread of disease, enemies far more deadly than the army outside. You can still see the brutal, swift justice of the whipping post and the gallows, a raw display of power designed to inspire fear, not fairness. You have seen the hard, narrow path of a woman's life, a world of